We're going to begin the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Bofi?
Present.
Mr. Castillo?
Mr. Davis.
Dr. Davis? Here. Mr. Davis?
Here.
Miss Ellis? Here. Mr. Garvey? Miss Holloway? Here. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Miss Orange Jones? Mr. Rock? Miss Voce? Here. Mr. Jack Walker?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. What's our first item?
Your consent agenda is ready for your approval, adding items 5.2 through 5.4.
Do we have a motion? Thank you, Mr. Rock. And a second? Thank you, Ms. Voce. Is there any discussion, board members? Is there any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your first item is on page 2, item 3.1, consideration of the test security irregularities report for the 2019-2020 school year. The LDE recommendation is to receive the report.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Voce, and a second by Mr. Rock. Board members, do you have any questions? Is there a presentation on this, Superintendent? No, not on this item? Okay. What about comment cards?
No, ma'am.
Is there any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 17, item 3.2, consideration of the 2020 fall reading report. The LDE recommendation is to defer until January 2021 AGII committee meeting and to receive the report regarding student literacy.
Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Rock. And a second by Dr. Davis. Do we have any comment cards on this item?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do we have a presentation? Okay, Superintendent?
Yeah, Dr.
Well,
Chasson will offer the presentation.
thank you.
As Dr. Chasson walks up, just as a bit of information, we have heard from the board a few times around the different initiatives that we have going concerning improving literacy throughout our state. Our team has been working hard on this particular effort. It is an initiative that is one of our primary initiatives. We simply wanted to update the board on those efforts to date, as well as preview some information about a more comprehensive plan that will be forthcoming in the spring. So, Dr. Chasson.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am really excited to present to you all today some updates on our literacy improvements.
Dr. Chasson, is your green light on? Okay, you might just have to pull the mic a little closer. Or do we need to switch it out, Ms. Davis? Okay.
All right, we'll try again. Good morning. No?
It's still not hearing.
Test, test.
What do y'all want me to do? We're going to have you start. Can you just speak as loudly as possible?
I sure can.
Okay.
I'll use my teacher voice.
That's what they're requesting on the dais.
So I'm happy to be able to present for you all this morning some updates on our literacy improvements. Should I remove my mask? I'll do that.
Jenna.
I will speak really loudly. So this morning we'll be going over some literacy improvements. As Dr. Brumley said, the team has been hard at work with a lot of collaboration. And so I'm excited to be able to share with you all what we're working on currently, what our different funding sources are for literacy improvements right now, and then looking ahead at what are some next steps and what you all can expect to see coming out of our literacy improvements. So as you all know, our Early Literacy Commission published a legislative report last January, which provides some clear recommendations for improving literacy outcomes. And these recommendations center on these basic core tenets, which is high quality literacy instruction and interactions by effective teachers that are intentionally supported by both leaders and families. As I said, I'll be weaving into today's presentation what funding sources we have for these literacy improvements so everyone can get an understanding of what funding we'll all be seeing over the next several years. For one, we know that we were allocated through State General Fund $2 million to invest in the K-2 literacy pilot that I'll be speaking about today. We were also awarded in 2019 a Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant, also known as CLSD Award. This money is specifically allocated for our CIR, our Comprehensive Intervention Required, and our UIRA, Urgent Intervention Required academic schools. This past August, we were thrilled to learn that we also received another federal grant, another CLSD award, and this money specifically must be allocated for our urgent intervention needed schools. In October, I presented to you all about our Education Stabilization Fund Rethink Education Model, or our REAL grant, which was specifically allocated money from USDOE in response to COVID that we were awarded for pre-K through third grade. And this pays for devices, connectivity, and also for literacy tutoring services. So I'll dig a little more into information around the K-2 literacy coaching pilot. And our coaching pilot has really gotten off to a great start this school year. We're in 13 schools around the state that were specifically selected for schools that showed an interest in piloting literacy improvements. And we also made sure to just include different types of schools, as well as schools that were using different Tier 1 curricula. And this was one of the Early Literacy Commission's recommendation, was to utilize school-level literacy coaches for literacy improvements. And so the long-term goal is that this literacy coaching model can become full-scale in time, and that there would be a school-level coach in every CIR and UIRA school. These coaches would be highly trained in early literacy development and effective coaching. So year one, this year as we pilot, we have a lot of yields out of this pilot that the idea is they would then be pushed statewide. And year one is to inform a comprehensive scope of training for both the coaches and the teachers involved, metrics for program implementation, as well as standard protocols for data analysis, coaching schedules, observations and feedback, professional learning, and program evaluation. So our coaches are engaging in some training this year, some professional learning around foundational reading skills, instructional coaching, communities of practice. So we're really encouraging collaboration between the coaches on best practices, and also job embedded support through our state level literacy coordinators. The teachers are also engaged at these pilot schools in different professional learning opportunities, again on the foundations of reading, and then job embedded support from their coaches, observations and feedback coaching cycles, data analysis, planning support, and the modeling of literacy lessons. This picture shows one of our pilot schools. And it is a teacher reviewing data and providing interventions to the students. Intervention time is incorporated into the ELA block as part of this model. This picture shows a specific action plan that a teacher has developed specific to the teacher needs. This next picture is a picture of a Zoom, a collaborative meeting between teachers, and one of the coaches is presenting how to engage students in COVID-style literacy centers. We have several measures of success. We are making sure along the way that we are collecting data to make improvements to the model and to inform these improvements and to show our early successes. And so we're collecting student reading data, so literacy screeners over time are being used to show progress in student achievement. Observation data, which will show us changes in teacher practice as a result of the coaching and professional learning for teachers, as well as survey data so that we can track changes from the teachers, coaches, and leaders' perceptions of the model. So our Early Literacy Commission also names a goal of a comprehensive literacy assessment plan. So that's something that we can all look forward to seeing more about as well. It's about a statewide screener that utilizes tools used at different times during the school year. So part of this literacy coaching model is that teachers are using screeners throughout the year to track the progress of students and using that to inform how they address the needs of students in those reading gaps and deficits. And so in response to the Early Literacy Commission, as part of this pilot and additional exploration, we're exploring a statewide screener that could achieve this goal as outlined by the Early Literacy Commission. And so the K2 pilot, the way I like to frame it is that this K2 pilot is a field testing. It is action research on what's to come. And so it's going to inform what are the things that we can then push out statewide. And that work is happening this school year. And so our CLSD grants, both our 2019 grant that will push specific literacy funding into CIR and UIRA schools, and our CLSD grant that we received this year for our UIN schools, we'll use some of these practices, we'll use this approach and this model that's being piloted through this K2 literacy pilot and use funding to pay for those supports. So things like professional learning and then paying for the hiring of additional human capacity in the form of literacy coaches at the school sites. I also wanted to tie into this, if you all remember in October, I presented on this grant on our real-time early access to literacy, our REAL grant that we were awarded. And so this is also additional funding for literacy in students through virtual tutoring services. So we were able to use some of that money to push out funding to systems for connectivity and devices for pre-K through third grade who showed a need for that. And now we will be able to provide some remote learning opportunities for literacy. So in looking ahead, our K2 literacy coaching pilot will yield some standard protocols for literacy improvements. Although we have the CLSD funding for a subset of our schools, or 3 subsets of our schools, what's important to note is that what we are piloting right now are practices that can be used statewide in any school. And so even though schools won't necessarily receive the additional funding to pay for things like a literacy coach, these practices and protocols and the professional learning that we can provide as a department will be offered to all schools, because we know that struggling readers and readers with deficits in those early grades in their reading skills don't just exist at CIR, UIRA, and UIN schools. They exist at every school in our state. And so these practices will be offered and encouraged to all schools in our state. We're also convening right now a family literacy engagement work group, and this is a really important part of our overall comprehensive plan for literacy, is that we're finding really inventive and just high impact ways to engage with families around literacy. So we have a work group made up of folks around the state, as well as a national expert, to help us weigh in on how do we best engage families around literacy. And so that will be woven into our plan for literacy improvement. So looking ahead, we will plan on releasing guidance, related materials, professional learning, all at this year's Teacher Leader Summit. And so, like I said before, the increase in human resources will be done through the federal grants, potential state funds, but these practices around literacy improvement can be used anywhere in the state. And so I'm happy to take any questions or hear any comments.
I believe Dr. Davis has a question.
Yeah, I'm curious, are we planning to have our literacy coaches be employees of a school district? Are they going to be state employees? I know the Mississippi model is state employees, but I think Arkansas is doing something a little different. And have we decided on a road that we're going to take, and why did we choose that one versus the other?
Yeah, so the idea is that schools who qualify for these funds will be able to, in this year's Super Act, there is a section where they can raise their hand and say, yes, we are interested in this work. We would like to apply for funding for a literacy coach. They have to put up some amount of funding to pay that literacy coach salary and benefits, and we are matching.
Okay.
Because we think it's really important that the system really shows that they want this to work, that they're committing the effort, and that the school wants this to work, because the school leader has responsibilities in this as well, to support that literacy coach, to make sure that the model works at the school level. So they would be school level employees, however, that we would contribute some funding for. However, we do feel it's our responsibility to support that coach and to provide professional learning opportunities, to provide some of the structure in which that coach will work, so that people really have a good understanding of how to best leverage that coach's time and abilities that will ultimately have impact on students.
Mr. Morris?
I had a couple, excuse me, I had a couple of questions. The first one, I've read and I've heard a lot lately about social studies integration into literacy programs, and I was wondering if you had given any consideration to that approach with the program.
Yeah, so those approaches, Mr. Morris, are through our high-quality curriculum. So most of our schools in the state have adopted curricula that is considered Tier 1 or high quality, and those do incorporate social studies into their approach. So specifically, many of our systems are using CKLA or Wit and Wisdom, which are two of the curricula that are rated as high quality by the department. And both of those incorporate a large amount of nonfiction text and resources, a lot of both social studies and science.
Okay, thank you. Second question, in your slide presentation, you had a reference to performance measures that you had identified. I was curious about goals, specific goals that you had set with the funds that have been allocated for this initiative. Have you considered any specific target goals?
Yes, so great question. Those goals are named in our grant. And so they're around those, on slide 12, we talk about the types of data that we're collecting. The student reading data, we are using a screener at multiple points throughout the year to track the students' progress. Then also named in the goal is observation data, so tracking changes in teacher practice, and then survey data, tracking changes in the perceptions of coaches, teachers, and leaders. So those are the measures that are named out in the grant that we have to report back to USDOE on.
Yeah, I was really looking for something along the lines of the data that I see is the literacy rate right now is around 45% or something like that. So when the program is completely implemented, where would we expect to see that literacy rate at?
Yeah, and that's not something that we have specifically named outside of the grant. And each grant has that phrased a little differently because it depends on the subset of schools that are being named.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Castile?
Yes, thank you. Great report. Thank you. Great effort. I don't know if you're familiar with or collaborating in any way with the Council for Grade Level Reading. It's just a national organization that's been doing some work around the country. So I just offer that as a resource if you haven't. Mr. Morris asked about the social studies program. I know we had, and we may have had this conversation, I apologize, but last year we heard a report on a pilot program for the integration of social studies and ELA. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, or if that's going to be covered at some other point, but can you give us just a quick update in terms of that? Are we still pursuing that pilot program?
Yes, we are. We actually were awarded an additional small grant opportunity to continue development of that integrated assessment model, and that's for 3rd through 8th grade. And so that model has been piloted for 2 years now in districts across the state. And so we are continuing the development of that model. It's something we received that waiver from USDOE saying that those systems don't have to take both tests, that they can just take this exploratory model test. So it is something we're continuing to pursue. I'm happy to share more about it too.
Okay. Is there any curriculum that's being developed along with the assessment portion of it? We've got the assessment, but are we making any adjustments to the actual curriculum?
Yeah, so we're making the adjustments to guidebooks actually as we go, since we are the publishers of guidebooks.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Foche?
Just along that strand of questioning, for school districts who have adopted Tier 1 curriculum that are not the guidebooks, when we're looking at potentially the ELA and social studies integrated assessments, what are our plans for those who have adopted other Tier 1 ELA curriculum? Are those systems able to participate and move forward with this? Or how are we going to approach this in the statewide model?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. So we are very aware that not every system is using guidebooks, and we're working through potentially what could that look like. One thing we're exploring is what could it look like to work with other publishers of high quality materials to model out assessments on that particular curricula. So we're still working through some of those details, but that's really where we're exploring and heading in that direction, is that there would be more than one assessment offered. That way folks aren't just forced into using guidebooks, but that there are other options and alternatives.
Are there any timelines set for these types of inquiries and initiatives?
So I will say broadly over the next few years, we do have 2 years of some successful piloting. We were obviously slowed down a lot on this last year because we were really full force with middle school piloting. So this other small grant that we were awarded is helping with the development, but we are still several years out from seeing that come to fruition statewide.
So Dr. Chasson, I would encourage you all to think about ways for implementing these practices in places where they're not able to invest in the additional, I would say, teacher leader. It seems like what this model really looks at. And I would encourage you, I know there's a model, I don't believe there's any schools in Louisiana, but Public Impact is a model for teacher leadership that keeps the teachers in the classroom and an accountability in the classroom. And just the research that I've looked at relative to teacher leadership, continuing on with the accountability for students has been very powerful. So I'd encourage you to look at that model and then also think about how this could be shaped in such a way to where it wasn't someone who didn't have a direct accountability for students or wasn't fully pulled out of the classroom. I also think that there's a lot of value for people to have roles where they're staying in the classroom and they're also doing, have opportunities outside of the classroom. I think it could improve our retention of people who are our teacher leaders. So I would encourage you to do that because I know that there are going to be places where financially they can't afford to do it. But then I also think that there are other benefits such as the retention down the road. So thank you for this update.
Dr. Bofi, if I may add to that, and our literacy team just met yesterday afternoon. It was really exciting where we are trying to go. And one of the conversations we have had is simply around making whatever it is that we end up doing affordable so that it is sustainable and not based on a continuous grant cycle being awarded. So we are thinking about that. We're thinking about how we can structure it in a way that make sense universally across the state, but at the same time, there's the options for local nuance and some degree of local flexibility. Another part of this is simply as we continue to talk about this idea of K-2 accountability, making sure that we have a screener assessment that can be embedded that is taking the place of something that is presently happening so that we're not adding in an additional assessment. So we have to start looking for that as well.
Ms. Fauché?
And piggybacking on Dr. Brophy, what you were discussing a little bit, I think the work of this Early Literacy Commission is vital. I think we need to make, obviously, the effort that we are into the K-2 accountability and the improvement of the reading. We have gone through, I guess, locally in different districts, many different types of approaches to this over the years. I know in my particular district, we had invested in what we called reading coaches, literacy coaches, for quite a while in our elementary schools that handled everything from K through 5. And as we got further into that model, we decided to shift and look at the teacher leader concept at each particular grade level. So we have now invested heavily in practicing teachers who, with common planning time for the kindergarten teachers together, or the first grade, or the second, everyday common planning, and having a teacher leader at each particular grade level to focus primarily on the literacy and the math concepts. And we have found that that really, for our district, is a much better approach to improving the literacy and the math skills at the grade levels, because that practicing teacher leads that curriculum effort. So as we're looking at this particular model, I'd appreciate if you'd look through maybe some of the research or to see if there's any modification, as opposed to a strictly a literacy coach that you pull completely out of a classroom to do these. Maybe also look at maybe some blended models to where we might look at leaders at each level continuing to practice, but having time and additional compensation to focus on that grade level, about grade level in the school. So just some consideration to that, and look to see if those are successful type models that we might be able to replicate.
Ms. Fauché, also just for your information, we, through just simply providing focus, but also through funding, we are trying to further support teacher leadership, differentiated pathways in a number of different ways, however that might look in an individual system, as you mentioned, but also focus and resource to support that instructional leadership team meeting at that campus, not about what's happening at the basketball game that night, but what's happening in that math classroom that day, as well as that job-embedded weekly professional development, whether it's shared grade level or shared content area. So we're going to continue to give focus to that as well as support.
Thank you.
Okay, board members, so the motion includes two items. One is the recommendation to defer the report until January. What's that? The fall reading report until January. And then the second part was to receive this report regarding the efforts to promote and improve student literacy. Do you have any objections? Was there public comment? Not this one. Okay, so hearing no objections, this motion passes. What's our next item? Thank you, Dr. Chasson.
Your next item is on page 18, item 4.1, consideration of an update report regarding reopening of schools in response to COVID-19. The department recommendation is to receive the report.
So we need a motion. Thank you, Ms. Orange-Jones, and a second by Ms. Holloway. Superintendent, are you providing this report?
Yes, Dr. Brophy. So we have a few different elements of this report. As you know, our systems, our educators, our students, families have all been engaged in educating through a global health pandemic. And I am consistently inspired by the innovations and the passion and the efforts that I'm seeing across our schools.
Did you see my innovation, Superintendent?
I was not sure what that was, but I was thankful we had plexiglass between us. So one of the elements of today's conversation is simply to provide firsthand information from our medical community. And so we have a couple of our medical experts, doctors, that have worked alongside us for the last 8-9 months, however long this experience has been. And these two gentlemen specifically have worked alongside me and our team nearly every single day with guidance, with collaboration, as well as their work with leaders across the state. In fact, almost every call that we have, whether it's a system leader call, an office hour call, or a system leader reopening roundtable call, these two gentlemen are there. They're either an active participant in that conversation or they are a listener involved in that conversation. And so I'm really thankful to have Dr. Finger here with us from Children's Hospital, as well as Dr. William Lenars from Ochsner here with us today to each make some comments about 3, 4, 5 minutes each, and then take questions from the board regarding how this particular semester has gone, what lessons we've learned around the virus, what we might need to be thinking about as we move into the spring semester. So gentlemen, at this time, we'd love to hear comments from both of you.
Thank you, Dr. Brumley, to the entire board for welcoming us here today. I would share your sentiment that the past academic semester in Louisiana, although has been trying, has been really inspirational, and I would count it as a massive success overall. We started with this planning several months before the school year started in early summer. And I think under your leadership and with those calls with school superintendents and leaders from across the state, we've been unified in our approach the entire time. And although there have been disruptions and it hasn't been perfect, by and large, I am confident and really impressed that we have kept our students and our entire educational team community safe through perhaps the most challenging times of the last century. It's been a mix of incredible operational planning at a statewide level that trickles down to individual schools, but it has been really in synchrony with what we've tried to achieve overall with the entire state. Although we've had to change and pivot somewhat, really our planning has remained in line the entire time. And I think one of the safest places for our students to be in the state of Louisiana is on school campuses right now, where they can be monitored by teachers and an entire educational team who understand the mitigation strategies that we put in place. Again, it comes down to 4 simple things: staying home when you're sick, wearing your mask, washing your hands, and socially distancing when you can. And although there have been many clusters of many, M-I-N-I, not many, M-A-N-Y, cases that have occurred, by and large, they've not occurred within the confines of school campuses and have occurred, as you guys have all heard, within the community where children are not under the watchful eyes of parents or their teachers and coaches. As we move into the next academic semester, I approach it like we're entering the second half of a football game. Everyone's tired, but I think there's a finish line on the horizon, but it's not right around the corner. We need to encourage everyone, our school leadership, our parents, our families, and our students to stick to the course, to stay vigilant, and to continue doing everything that we've been doing for the past 3.5 to 4 months to get us through to the end. And again, the end is going to be a moving target, but I feel that for the first time in 9 months, we have the vision of that end being something that we can aim to and see at some point in 2021. I recognize that there's still going to be disruption, that it's not perfect, that we have some schools doing in-person, some schools doing virtual, and some schools doing a hybrid model, which I recognize, again, leads to imperfections in educational equity. But everyone has really done an incredible job managing the uncertainty and really bringing down some of the concern to say, hey, we can and will do this, and with everyone being unified to achieve the goals that we all had when we set out. And you challenged us, what can we do to safely educate our students and keep the entire team safe? So I'm very encouraged by the entire state's approach to this and look forward to continuing with the successful second academic semester after the new year.
Thank you, Dr. Finger.
Do you have that written down, and could you redo it in a really short YouTube clip that I can share with other people? Because there are a lot of people that I think I hear encouragement from you, and I think there's a lot of people who need to hear that right now. So thank you so much for what you shared.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, well, I can. Can others? Okay.
Billy Lenars from Oxnard Hospital for Children. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much. Over the course of whatever 8 or 9 months that has come to feel like 8 or 9 years, I feel that really you guys as educators and your school leaders at school levels, and we have sort of become co-champions for children's health, because remember, our whole interest in assisting the schools through this grew out of the realization that the absence of education is in itself detrimental to children's health. So we've certainly come to appreciate you guys so much more as partners in the same goal for our kids. So a few things, and my little piece is probably more some observations being strung together. The first is that clearly I remember sitting here however many months ago and talking to the now 170 some schools that we are helping to support through our schools program. One of the biggest concerns was we are never going to get kids to do this. You know, children wearing masks, it's not going to happen. Well, I just want to go all the way back to what we said from the very beginning, which is children are far and away more adaptable and more resilient than adults. We know that from our work with them in the medical arena, and that has been really been borne out very consistently. I had the opportunity to visit some of the Jefferson Parish schools in person last week, and literally at an elementary school that does have all children from pre-K up masked, we saw out of hundreds of children, maybe 1 or 2 children whose mask had slipped down over their nose, and that was it. And there were no, I don't want to wear a mask, no behaviors at all. Anyway, kids are doing such a great job, and if you think about that, that's who we're supporting, and we have the benefit of their incredible resiliency. It kind of, buoys some optimism around this. In the medical, meanwhile, on our side of the front, the COVID front, I would tell you that we continue to see that children do not get nearly as sick, nearly as often as adults. Children, fortunately, just don't get severe COVID very frequently. And the MIS-C, multi-system inflammatory syndrome associated with COVID that you see in the press, while we do predictably now, after each crest of a peak, see some small number of children with this, and while it can be serious, what I can tell you is the vast majority of them do absolutely fine in the long run. And again, this occurs mostly in the teenage years and not in young children. So now moving to observations around our work with the schools and our hotline, which has to do with exposures and quarantines and that type of thing. I would just validate what Dr. Finger said. The vast majority of cases that we've seen in the schools were not transmitted in the schools. The vast majority of cases are coming from the community, and this would be in both adults, faculty and staff, and in children. I can probably count on one hand the number of cases that were clearly transmitted within school, and there's no explanation beyond that. So the message there is we need to continue to encourage, schools to message families and parents that what they do outside of school impacts their children's and other people's children's educations quite a bit. I guess, and I'm happy to take questions, but the last comment I would make is a little bit of editorial on the new quarantine options that were released by the CDC, I guess, about a week and a half ago, and then reiterated by the Louisiana Department of Health last week. And so these are what I'm referring to are the options to shorten quarantine to either 10 days or 7 days. This is opinion. Obviously, the CDC says all of those are options. But what I think is important for y'all as leaders and school leaders at the individual school level who are making decisions on this along with the Department of Public Health to remember, and it's very clearly spelled out, that when you shorten from 14 to 10 days, you do incur anywhere up to 10% risk of virus transmission that is almost completely eliminated by the full 14 days. And then the challenges around the 7-day are the requirement of a test, the availability of the test, the dating of the test, and the further increased risk. So what has become clear is both of these shortened quarantine guidelines do really pivot upon the ability to strictly mask and distance during this shortened period. And, in some settings that is challenging, as we know, especially with our very youngest age children in pre-K, K, and the early childhood years, simply by the physical constraints of the spaces they're in. So that's sort of a stream of consciousness, series of comments on where we are. I am optimistic that we will continue to learn from what we've done. One of the things that we've seen more and more of our schools doing is capitalizing on an advantage that we have in Louisiana that they certainly don't have in Omaha or Chicago or Ohio, which is that we often have weather that allows us to move outside. And so as we move around and as we talk with schools, we see lots of people doing that. It is clearly a safer place to be, lets kids distance out. And we applaud the innovation that pulls lunches and learning and exercise and everything out of doors, because we're fortunate enough to live in a place that allows that a large, today being an exception, a large amount of the time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Garvey?
I guess my question would go to Dr. Finger, if that's okay. But both doctors said that the safest place for our children to be is in the classroom because more of the spread seems to happen outside of the classroom than in the classroom. And you're shaking your heads, I think, in agreement. I guess that was true, but can you verify that was true a few weeks ago when we were in kind of a lull period and had reduced number of cases back then? And I see head shaking.
Absolutely. It's been true for the duration of the pandemic, that statement. I think over 85 to 90% of cases in children are acquired either from a household member who is positive, and the vast majority of those household members are older teenagers or adults. A smaller proportion are acquired from outside the household. And the vast majority of those, for this purposes of this conversation, are teenagers who are the ones who can't follow directions from either parents or their teachers. I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
No, I have one of those. I know
Yeah,
about
exactly.
that, yes. So it's safer to be on the school campus during a lull, and it's safer to be on school campus during this spike that we're seeing. What I'm leading up to is there's talk about anticipating another spike because of the Christmas holidays. The current spike is somewhat being blamed on Thanksgiving holidays. There's an anticipation of another spike happening because of the Christmas visiting and teenagers doing all their teenage stuff, not listening. Would you say that if there is another spike after Christmas, the same would be true, that the safest place for our children would be on campus?
I believe that is the case, and I think the challenge that schools across the state will face is not just the concern about spread on school, but having adequate staff members to staff the schools, because it's not just students who are affected by community spread, but educators and all the other school personnel who contribute to activities of daily living on the campuses. So that's another one of my concerns, being able to adequately staff in-person educational opportunities as we see increased surge across the entire state.
But in conclusion, still the safest place in a spike after Christmas would be on campus.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add that we have literally seen the positivity rate, because Oxnard is doing teacher testing and student testing for some large systems. We literally have seen the positivity rate of the faculty and student testing rise as the community rate rises and go down, and it's usually right about where the overall community rate that's reported by the LDH is. So I 100% agree that we're not going to mitigate the pandemic by not having school. And that, those were lessons that we talked about here that we saw in, Australia and Asia and Europe before we were deep in this.
Thank you.
Mr. Castile?
Thank you. Thank you both. And particularly thank you because you've been with us throughout this entire process and you provided really great advice. Dr. Lennard, I want to follow up on your sort of stream of consciousness that you mentioned toward the end. We all welcome the new CDC guidelines. And in fact, we have an emergency proclamation, decisions that were made at this level, which, frankly, I think were great in terms of us following those guidelines and reducing from 14 days to 10 days. Are you suggesting that perhaps we should revisit that in any way? Because I know there was a lot of excitement about, wow, we don't have to quarantine quite as long.
Yeah, I think there anecdotally is definitely sort of fatigue and breakdown and adherence to quarantine as you go beyond 10 days. So, it's unclear how much faithful quarantining was actually happening at the very end. It did, it kept kids out of the classroom. No, what I'm saying really is that be aware that By going to 10 days, you no longer eliminate 100% risk, and therefore you have to just stay laser focused on masking and distancing to mitigate that little bit of additional risk that you're biting off.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, I had two comments. The first one, just want to echo Mr. Castillo's comments and also Superintendent Brumley. We very much appreciate your partnership throughout this entire ordeal. And then also, your testimony and the public venue here just gives us so much credibility with the recommendations that this board has approved. So if we look back on your initial testimony and the reopening guidelines that this board approved, my question would be to you that since then, what have we learned, if anything, that we would consider making any changes to those original guidelines? Should we stay where we're at in the second semester with those original guidelines? Would you guys recommend any additions or any deletions to those original guidelines?
No, I'm very comfortable that the guidelines, and we've evolved as the CDC and State Department of Health have made adjustments, but we have not had a lot of waxing and wanings with school openings and closings that we've seen in some of the other states. And I believe that's a testament to just staying unified and laser focused on our goal, which is keeping the students and the entire educator team safe. I think we continue as is. There's nothing large that I would change. I'd echo Dr. Linares' comments about staying focused on the options to decrease quarantine. It doesn't mean you're free and clear, and you need to continue everything else you're doing in order to continue that mitigation. But there's nothing huge that I would change. I'm very confident in that.
And I think the reason that there's nothing major to change is that we haven't, in fact, what we learned about mitigating the virus spread from the very beginning has just been over and over validated. And unfortunately, the tools are masking and distancing. And when we talk about, I remember sitting up here and talking about sort of the third pillar being cohorting or grouping. But cohorting and grouping is just a way of reducing the number of kids and adults that are impacted when there does need to be a quarantine. So our toolbox is really the same. If anything, there's been more research on actual masking and its effectiveness, and it clearly is highly effective.
Thank you. My second question and my last question, Dr. Brophy. I think everyone in this room is really interested in hearing more about the vaccination process. Do you guys have any insight that you could share as far as that vaccination process and specifically how it would apply to educators and our students?
So I can tell you that Louisiana received its, initial vaccination allocations at the same time as all the other states. That Oxner Health, being the largest system in the state, we are well through our 1A, which are the frontline COVID providers. And just to be clear for everyone, when we say providers, we're talking about everyone who works in a COVID unit, physician, environmental services, respiratory therapy. Everyone is sort of treated the same. So those will all be checked off before the end of this week, and moving into in stages the rest of healthcare providers. I think that we're really waiting. I guess one other tidbit, which is public enough to mention, is that it looks like next week we will be getting twice the allocation that we were originally told, which is just sort of good news in general for the limitation on how many people we can vaccinate as we go through the broader population. I have not received any indication of how teachers will be prioritized after the first group, which is healthcare workers and those in chronic care and aging facilities.
Yeah, I agree. I think the initial statement from the state included teachers somewhat higher up than the general population in the class of essential workers. And I anticipate that that should happen starting, probably at some point 2 to 3 months after the new year, based on the information we've gotten, which is constantly changing. Again, it's a logistical, operational, huge effort. But I'm confident that enough people want to do the right thing and stay on the same page that it's not going to take 4 years to get to everyone. It's going to be a challenging 6 months of operational logistics, but again, there will be enough vaccine by the summer to effectively vaccinate lots of the population within Louisiana. It's just not an overnight process. And just to sort of echo it again, this technology for this vaccine is something that the world has never seen before. It is effective, it's safe, and absolutely it is the final tool in eliminating this pandemic for us and our community. So I will echo loudly that this is something everyone should get when it's available for you.
And I would just add, and I think Dr. Finger would feel the same way, if we are invited to weigh in at the state level on the prioritization, I mean, we certainly see teachers as frontline folks who should be prioritized. So you can be assured that if we have the opportunity, our voices will be with you guys to advance you guys in the sequence.
Thank you.
Dr. Bovee.
Ms. Fauché had a question, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Davis.
I'd like to just, echo the common sentiment around this table in thanking Drs. Finger and Lenars for all of the work with us in helping to establish guidelines, implement those guidelines, and be a tremendous resource for us as practitioners out in our districts. But I think it's something that Dr. Bovee touched on initially. I'd like us maybe to explore if that's a possibility. We as school leaders have had the benefit of weekly Zoom calls and meetings. I know Dr. Lenars, my district has a partnership with Ochsner as well, and with the Methodist Foundation and other medical entities within our area. And over the course of the last several months, we have weekly calls with the medical professionals that make us feel as district leaders that the measures we're implementing are the best that they can possibly be. And I think it's been borne out by the results in that we're not seeing the spread occurring in school. It's from the community, possibly brought in. However, the comfort that we have received as leaders sometimes does not transfer to all the members of our school system, our staff, our teachers, that still feel a little tense and a little uneasy because they haven't heard directly from the medical professionals, hey, what you're doing is right, here are the guidelines, here's what you can do better, here are our concerns, our safety. So if there would be any kind of a way that we could have more interaction with the medical professionals and our staffs in terms of providing some of that comfort, whether it be through just a PSA, public service announcement that we could show to our staffs in discussing some of this, or in some way get that message out. Because as we translate it as school leaders, sometimes there's, well, you're not a doctor, you're not a medical professional. But if they hear it directly from the medical professional, that carries a lot more weight. So if we could explore a mechanism or a way to get that message out to our staff members directly, I think it would be beneficial statewide. So, and I think, Dr. Bovee, that's something that you started with by saying it'd be great if
It is.
everybody could hear what you just said.
It is, and it's something that I felt at the last meeting as well. And so even the introduction, I mean, there's a lot of power in being able to look in your eyes and hear the things that you guys are telling us today. And the video for this meeting is not that powerful, right? And despite how important all this is, people aren't like sitting at their computer screens watching us, right? Teachers are in their classrooms teaching. So it doesn't have to be long and it doesn't have to be expensive, but just a short way of introducing who you are, what you have to say, and also connecting it to the real things that we've done here in our state. Because people are getting messages all over the place, but they're not necessarily the messages that we want them to hear. So, and there's a lot of power in, it coming directly from you and, and your voice, not necessarily the written word. So I know that Mr. Davis also had some input.
I did. So I want to echo the other comments that were thanking you guys for your partnership and your support throughout this process. Certainly, I think we all recognize that this has been a partnership, as you guys noted, in terms of us all working together for a common good and common goal here in a way that perhaps we have not in the past. And so I thank you for that. And I know that it's been tremendous for the school leaders and for the department and their leadership in terms of how we have set up and how they have guided us as a policy board in adopting our guidelines and our standards that we have utilized throughout this period. And so I'm excited about the updates. I know it's not all some exciting news all the time, but we do know that while we can't necessarily see the light at the time, we hear the train, so to speak. So we want to be re-energized by that. There was a note Dr. Lenars made just now relative to lending support to the idea of how we can prioritize our educators and our school and personnel for vaccinations. And I wanted to ask Dr. Brumley about that very same thing. Certainly, those who are looking forward to vaccinations all want to be front of the line. And there's certainly those who are working closest to it, quite literally and physically, ought to be the front of the line. But as we go forward with that line of thinking, our educators and those in our schools are right there. And there's a tremendous need, a great population, folks who are taking that risk and being that brave and doing their duty every single day as well in those environments. And so for my sake here, Dr. Brumley, can you let me know or let us know as a board what we can do, what we have done from both a department side, but perhaps also from this board relative to the encouragement of those authorities that we can reach out to prioritizing access to the vaccinations to our education community?
Yes, sir, Mr. Davis. So I had previously shared a note with the Secretary of the Department of Health, Dr. Phillips, who's been most helpful along with members of her team such as Dr. Welch, Dr. Cantor, to help us navigate this situation. But I had provided her a note asking for priority access for educators in regards to the vaccine. I had a follow-up conversation with Dr. Phillips, reiterated the same message, and then I went ahead and formalized that with an official note under the seal of our office as an agency, requesting that early child care workers, early childhood providers across the state, birth to 4, as well as every pre-K to 12 educator, whether that's a certificated employee or a staff member, such as a bus driver, paraprofessional secretary, receive priority access to the vaccine. Our team tried to do a calculation of every employee birth to 12 in the educational community, and we came up with a number of 166,000 individuals. And so we did request from the Department of Health and a copy to the governor priority access birth through 12th grade for educators to receive the vaccine. And I think this is also important, and I obviously am not a medical doctor, but I think it's also important and an opportunity because our birth through 12th grade employees cut across every region of the state. They cut across every demographic in our state. And so it's a really good sample population of the state in terms of combating this vaccine. And certainly I believe that society further appreciates the role of an open school or child care center every single day. So yeah, that is the work of the agency in terms of that. I can't speak to BESE's role other than knowing that BESE too is very interested in this being a priority.
Thank you, Superintendent. So, question for the chair, but also for the president, Ms. Holloway. I would certainly like us as a board, and I'm only one person, so the board means a vote by a matter of business, but I want to lend my support from my seat to ensuring that our education community gets access to this vaccine as soon as possible. I don't know if there's an opportunity for action on that at this point during this particular business item, or something we need to look at tomorrow during the board meeting. But I would ask that we defer to the president here or to the chairperson for this committee if there's an opportunity for business here, if we need to look at this tomorrow. But I do want to make an action on this so that we have a communication, an endorsement from this board accordingly for that.
Ms. Holloway, what's your preference?
I would consider a conversation. We can do it today or tomorrow, but today's fine. I think that's a great recommendation, Tony. Whatever the board feels, if you want to open it up at this time to consider, for the board members to consider if this is the right
Ms.
decision
Davis,
to make.
did we bring in an item of business on this at this time?
Davis, that's the executive director. I think it would be fine if you made a motion to direct me to draft a letter and forward it to the appropriate person, if you want to do that. So you can add to this motion to receive the report and direct the executive director to formulate a letter and forward that on to the appropriate. You would like to do that?
Mr. Davis, do you want that to be your motion?
I would like that to be the motion, please.
Okay.
Second.
And a second by Ms. Holloway. Board members, do you have any discussion on that particular piece? Mr. Garvey?
Yes, I do. My understanding, and I'd like to ask the doctors if they know more about this, is that the preliminary categories for the state of Louisiana has a Category 1, which you said we're underway with now, a Category 2A, a 2B, and then a C, and the teachers are in the 2B, and it seems to me like maybe they should be in 2A. And if that information is correct, maybe this letter should mention, could we move teachers up from 2B to 2A?
Just as a point of clarification, I don't think anything at this time is set in rock and stone.
Correct.
So
It was described as preliminary.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at. So I think what I might suggest is asking for strong consideration for the educational community to be moved as high up the classification as possible, as opposed to being specific in the numbers or the tiering, because that's in flux right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Board members, is there any other conversation about this motion?
No, I think that we're in line, Dr. Bofi, because there is a great support out there and movement from our superintendents and others that we come forward in support of this, the letter, and supporting them out in the educational field.
Okay. Ms. Orange-Jones?
Just a quick note. First of all, thank you, Mr. Davis. I think it's an excellent recommendation. Just to follow up on your last point, Doctor, you just mentioned it's a little bit in flux. Can you just say a little bit more about how that might become in flux and eventually how it might settle?
Sure. I think the federal government has provided broad guidelines to the states, but each state is implementing the sequencing of the vaccine allocation slightly differently. So there is a little bit of art to it based on the composition on the individual population within each state. So I think broadly speaking, all the states are operating under the same guidelines, but there might be some individual tweaks based on the age and population of each individual state for the precise allocation. I think it's clearly recognized that the educator community is counted as essential worker and frontline workers. Exactly, certainly it is by the state of Louisiana, I know that.
Thank you.
Okay, before we take votes on these, I need you guys to help me answer a question that my students and staff have. So when you get a positive case in a school, then you have to identify who may have been within 6 feet of an individual for 15 minutes. So that physical distance is taken into consideration, but there's not any consideration relative to mask. Do you know why? Because we have some really committed mask wearers, and so they feel like they're doing a whole lot by wearing their mask, but then they're still having to be quarantined if they were within the 6 feet for 15 minutes. And I'm just not privy to the information behind why that's the case.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty simple, although it might not make you happy, is that no one really trusts everyone to do what they say they've been doing, and that we've allowed only essential healthcare workers to be the ones who can say, yes, I've been wearing that mask effectively. Now, that being said, although those folks still might need to be out on quarantine, wearing the mask should keep them safe from actually catching COVID-19. So again, I recognize it's operationally challenging and tough to understand why that is, but it's because that there's no one on site really making sure, eyes on, that mask wearing is effective and continuous 24/7.
Yes, well, there are people watching to make sure, but it's not 24/7. And I can tell you, one of the things that has surprised me about this experience is how difficult it is to tell someone that they have to go home for a couple of weeks. So that is very difficult. So my fellow board members have done an excellent job of thanking you guys for all of your hard work, and I appreciate that of them. But I'm about to issue a challenge to you. So we really appreciate all this work on COVID, but as you heard in the earlier presentation, we have some issues in our state relative to literacy. Doctors are the first people that meet children and their families. We need some help. I would like to continue this partnership beyond COVID, and we need the healthcare community to help us address the literacy rate in our state. So I'm going to issue that challenge to you, that you stay at the table when COVID isn't an emergency and a crisis for us anymore, and that you join hands with us and help us figure out how to deal with the problems we have in our state relative to literacy. Okay, we've got some public comment. Joe David, is this for this one? You want to check them? Shan says yes.
Well,
Okay.
we need to direct them to come to the podium and to please use this, not bulk.
Okay,
This way.
so we have some public comment. You guys are going to actually do public comment at the podium instead of at the table. So that's Joe David with the Louisiana Association of Principals and Michael Falk with the Louisiana Association of Superintendents, school superintendents, I guess.
Yes, and we would also ask
Yes.
that as you come to the mic, you come like Mr. Falk just did from that direction, and you exit also that direction. We have streaming going on right here. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Falk, I'm going to go ahead and let the doctors know that we appreciate their time, but that you're dismissed if you'd like to go and do other work.
Dr. Finger, Dr. Lenars, just all I can offer is a thank you. And you know we appreciate so much your work with us every single day and the guidance. And the board and certainly individuals in the audience hopefully can appreciate why when I continue to suggest that we can do face-to-face schooling in Louisiana, or that we have the opportunity to look at quarantining in a different way, it is because I'm in touch with doctors such as Dr. Lenars and Dr. Finger that gives me the confidence to make those suggestions, and knowing the work that our leaders are doing at the district levels, at the system levels, but also assistant principals, teachers in schools to make this work every single day, in the logistics and the organization and the innovation. And so just thankful for all of your help. You were here with us for meeting in July, you're here with us in December, and you just continue to help us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Falk with the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents, and we have surveyed our group, and we wholeheartedly support the effort to include educational personnel to be considered for the vaccine. Dr. Brumley has reached out to us. We reached out to our membership, and it's overwhelming. And we thank y'all for doing this at this time and helping us to meet the needs.
Thank you, sir.
Joe Davy with the Louisiana Association of Principals. And we have been working with Mike and the superintendent's organization to see this through. I just want to say that speaking with principals and teachers and educators, central office staff throughout the state, they're overwhelmed and they're tired and they've been working really hard. And I think this will send a message to them that you think that they're a priority, not just in the classroom, but across the state. So I think this is a great message that you're sending and also taking care of their healthcare needs. So we thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Okay, board members, any objection? Hearing none, our motion's passed. Thank you. What's our next item?
Dr. Bofi, I still have a presentation in regard to this particular item.
What?
But it
Seriously?
but it does not require a vote.
Okay.
It is the request of the board that I provide this presentation, so, and it just disappeared.
I'm sorry.
She's pulling it back up.
Okay.
Sorry, members, we still have a report to receive.
I just wanted to allow the medical doctors to go through.
That makes a lot of sense, sir.
Okay. All right, I'm going to have to. Dr. Buck, can you tilt your screen
In? Yeah.
or towards
Like-
me a little bit?
Okay.
My screen, there we go. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So what I'm sharing with you first is our reopening dashboard. This is as of the end of last week, and this shows total enrollment by primary instructional method. So this is basically modality of instruction, and what you can tell is as of the end of last week, we are around 65% of our students throughout the state who are in fully face-to-face instruction 5 days a week, roughly 15% who are in hybrid, and then roughly 20% who are in full virtual. That's across the state in public, traditional public charter, as well as non-public. This is a look at our devices that we have available across the state. Systems have done a really good job of making these purchases, tracking these purchases through. We have been able to overcome some supply chain issues that plagued us during the summer. And finally, we actually have more mobile devices than we have students. And so that is a significant breakthrough for us as a state for that to be the case. This is confirmed home internet connectivity. We are still presently just above 70%. We are at 72% of our students who we have been able to confirm home connectivity. Some really good news coming out of the FCC with over $300 million coming down from the FCC to help support broadband and internet connectivity across the state. So we're hoping to see that move quickly and hope to see that improve the numbers that we show on this particular dashboard here today. This is a look at the number of students that systems throughout the state have connected with system funds. So these are students who did not have confirmed connectivity through their parent or guardian, and instead systems have utilized funds at the system level to provide internet for these students. So about 38,000. Overwhelmingly via MiFis. The next bit of information relative to this presentation just has to do with lessons that have been learned so far over the course of the fall. In October, the board directed the agency to provide a report concerning lessons learned in regards to virtual learning, including feedback from educators, students, and parents to inform future implementation. We are partnering with WestStat to conduct focus groups with stakeholders across the state. The information will be analyzed and shared with BESE in January. We had hoped to have our partners from WestStat here with us today, but due to regulations within their own organization, they were unable to travel. So it looks like we will provide this information to the board in January instead. The timeline allows the department to meet the objectives of the motion and use the results to develop guidance and policy for 21-22. the process will result in a more robust research and a more comprehensive final report. So while we do not have a report for you, board, here today, I can assure you, and it's my personal belief, that what we will be able to provide as a result of this small delay is a better report for you. Presently, we have, I think, 41 focus groups that are taking place throughout the state. Some of those have already concluded. Some of those are still scheduled. This is system leaders, teachers, parents, and students. People have the opportunity to register for these groups, and so we have, again, over 40 focus groups taking place throughout the state. We will also be updating our Strong Start page as we collect data to understand the experiences of Louisiana students and educators. This data will inform decisions about supports that we need to offer, lessons learned, and needed improvements in the spring, and then 21-22 as well. The focus groups are gathering feedback from these individuals. As I mentioned, the results will be analyzed and rolled into the winter Strong Start report that we'll share with you. We also have a survey option available for stakeholders if they're unable to participate in a focus group opportunity. The school systems also will be surveyed as a follow-up to their August survey with the same themes and priorities. This is just a map of what has and what is taking place with the initial survey that we put out for systems in July, the focus groups that are taking place now, the additional surveys that are happening, and then we will be bringing that information to the State Board here in January, and hopefully getting to a point where we can provide systems with additional guidance going into the spring and next school year. This is just a sample of what that calendar looks like. You can see in November, we were doing focus group questions, finalizing plans, scheduling those focus groups. On the 16th of November, those focus groups began. They have continued. We've also have started the survey so that people have an opportunity to weigh in, and that way we'll be doing wrap-up soon, and then again hope to provide a report to the board in January. So the virtual focus groups are being held for 5 stakeholder groups. As I mentioned, we have gathered participants through all our department channels, so we've pushed out this opportunity in all of our channels. The questions cover 5 priority topics: academics, mental health and well-being, virtual learning, transitions between those various modes of learning, and communications. And as I mentioned, we have just over 40 groups that have been scheduled to date. What's next is that January report. I would add with the students, with the student groups, one of the things that we did with the student groups is we did a reach out to some of the groups that already exist, whether it's the student council group from throughout the state or groups, other groups that have already been formed, and have reached out to them for their participation, including Ed Rising, which is our group of students who are in high school who want to be teachers. So the January report, that will be coming to you, as well as information that's a roll-up from that survey. So Dr. Bofi, thank you for allowing me to extend that time, but I just wanted to provide the board with an update on that.
Thank you. Board members, I want to give you the opportunity to ask any additional questions you might have now. Yes,
I'd just
sir?
like to make a comment. I was able to join one of the focus groups and although I can't talk about what we discussed, but I was a part of I was invited to do the dual enrollment focus group, and it was done, I believe it was November 13th, and I got to meet with Miss Keisha Smith, and we did it through Zoom, and we had some students from my school and schools around Louisiana, and we got to discuss things that they were adding for information on dual enrollment. Even though I can't speak with detail, what I'd like to say is, as a high school student coming into high school, I didn't really understand what dual enrollment was and how the credits roll into college, and what they're instituting is really helping out with students. Because this year, I'm going to be honest, this has been a really confusing year as a high school student, not really knowing what's going on and how to get college credit as I'm about to go into college for it being my senior year. Being able to do this focus group and being able to hear from officials was really relaxing, I'd say. And it was a really great focus group, and it was amazing to have the opportunity. And also with the dashboard initiative, I got to bring that back to my school, because I think at the last meeting I discussed on how I really loved having dashboards to see student enrollment, and it got great approval from teachers and even students. A lot of students really liked seeing where we were with student enrollment, student to ratio device, because I think that hearing information everywhere, it may not be the true information, but seeing information from BESE and seeing the numbers right there gave everybody a push to keep on masks and stay social distant. And with regards to Mr. Garvey's comment, I'm not one of those teenagers that's just going around doing whatever. So I like to put that out there, and also like to let everybody know I'm not just, I'm staying with the guidelines. So it was a great opportunity to be a part of the focus group, and I'll stick with those guidelines. I won't be one of those teenagers.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. We're super proud to have you, and thank you for following.
Thank you.
Dr. Bofi, Mr. Walker has narrowed his college search, I believe, to 4 universities, so any one of the 4 will be lucky to have him.
They will. They
Thank you.
certainly will.
Maybe he needs to lead a focus group for our students in maintaining these guidelines.
Yes, ma'am.
That would be
That'd be
helpful.
great. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Anything else, board members? No. All right. So I think our motions have passed already. What is our next item?
Your next item is on page 19, item 4.2, consideration of an update report regarding the Louisiana Balanced School Calendar Model and alternative school calendar options. The department recommendation is to receive the report.
Thank you, Mr. Rock. Ms. Voce, is that a second? Thanks for looking at me. Okay, Superintendent?
Thank you, Dr. Bofi. This agenda item is a continuation of previous agenda items. We do have information to share today. I believe first, Mr. Grimion is going to share information around mastery and competency-based, instead of using the instructional minutes, looking at possibilities in the future to look at student mastery of concept and their ability to promote or advance. And so we've done some initial research on that. Several of you have contributed to that, so I thank you for that. So he will share that information. But also, as we talked about the balanced calendar, we have invited 3 leaders to be here with you today just because I felt like it would be important to hear them talk through their experiences with that. So we have a couple of system leaders, one who this year has implemented a balanced calendar in their school system, one who is working through a process of potentially implementing a balanced calendar, and then we have a school principal here with us today who leads a school that uses a balanced calendar. So Mr. Grimion, will start with you, and then we'll go into the testimony from those system and school leaders.
Yeah, so the way the deck is actually structured is we'll start off with the balanced calendar piece and then go into the
Mr. Grimion, are the mics on?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Not really.
What about this one? I'll talk really loud. I'll use my teacher voice. Never a teacher. Anyway, we'll start off with the balanced calendar piece of this presentation. Just to give you an overview.
Is it advancing on your end? Okay.
Okay, here we go. So in August of this past year, BESE directed us to take a look at the potential development of a balanced school calendar and other possible alternative school calendar options. If you remember, in October, we presented research of that work. And just to give you some statutory background, this is all information we've discussed before, but revised statute 17-154.1 requires a minimum of 177 days of instruction at 360 minutes a day. That is that 63,720-minute instructional requirement that you find in Bulletin 741. Of that 63,720, students have to actually be in attendance for 60,120 minutes. The difference between those two numbers is 3,600 minutes, which equates to the 10 excused absences that we've built into the policy. Again, nearly all LEAs adhere to 17-154.1 by using that traditional calendar model where students go to school for anywhere from 8.5 to 9.5 months, followed by a 2.5 to 3.5 month break in the summer. It's important to note that 17-134 does allow us to utilize alternative calendar models, including a balanced calendar if that's a direction that a particular district wants to go in. Just to go into the year-round education overview, again, we discussed this last meeting. The most popular balanced calendar model is that 45-15 model where students go to school for 9 weeks, equivalent to the 45 days, and then they're off for 3 school weeks, which is the 15 school days there. Around the country, districts and states that use a balanced calendar model, you'll predominantly see this particular track, the 45-15 track. The idea behind the balanced calendars, we use those 15 days in between learning periods to provide enrichment, remediation if necessary, and then also students have an opportunity to do short-term internships, apprenticeships, what have you. And this is a visual representation of what that calendar would look like relative to our current traditional calendar. So again, we've discussed a lot of this information before, but it's hard to get a full grasp of how this would operate in practice until you've seen it firsthand. So we're lucky enough to have 3 individuals in attendance today who've implemented the balanced calendar approach in their schools and systems. And I would invite Ms. Allison Hughes, Superintendent of Red River, Jeff Powell, Superintendent of Rapides, and Glenn Colvin, the principal of Shreve Island Elementary in Caddo, to discuss what they've learned from a balanced calendar and any challenges that they've encountered by switching over to this mode of learning.
We have some amazing system and school leaders throughout the state, as we all know, and I'm really thankful to have Mr. Powell, Ms. Hughes, Mr. Colvin with us today, who I know and have worked with professionally, and know they are very student-centered, and they want the best outcomes for kids that they possibly can have, and they are willing to challenge whatever status quo might exist within their school and their community to get those results. And so I appreciate their courage, and I appreciate them being here to testify and offer feedback to the board today. So, Ms. Hughes?
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. I'm from the north. This is actually our first year of implementation. We implemented district-wide the balanced calendar. It was a challenge at first. I had a lot of selling to do to parents, to teachers, but I can tell you that everything has gone very well. We have had no challenges, other than the fact that we could not conduct our first intercession period, our first remediation period because of COVID. We had to close for the 2 weeks that we were supposed to do remediation on our first break. But other than that, we have had a very, very good experience. Our teachers love it. Our model actually is a little bit skewed this year because of the late start. We did not start until August, the last week of August with our students. And we actually brought teachers in August the 3rd, did a month of professional development with them, adjusting the pacing and the curriculum to fit our model. Our model is a 4-day on-site instruction and a 1-day virtual instruction. So we actually go Monday through Thursday on-site with Friday of virtual instruction. We also use that Friday for professional development for teachers. Because of limited staff with COVID, it's very difficult for us to have our team meetings as we normally do. So we use those Fridays for professional development and team meetings and planning for our teachers. We're in the process now of planning for next year. We are looking at swapping our intercession days up a little bit. We offered our intercession remediation days to virtual students to come in for on-site instruction for a couple of days. That has not been utilized. We didn't get a lot of interest from our virtual students. So we're going to look at changing that a little bit, how we expand that information and give more option to those students for remediation. We're looking at funding sources to keep that. We funded that with some CARES money, and of course, we won't have that option next year. So we're looking at how to fund those intercession days. Looking at what our start date would be because of the late start, we had a challenge getting in our instructional time before testing, especially at our high school. So we're actually going to look at making sure we get all of those instructional days in and back up our start date to accomplish that and us be able to test during the regular testing window. As far as community-wide, our community has embraced it. The biggest problem that we had, and one of the reasons, two of the reasons that we looked at, or I've always wanted to implement, but the major reasons were, number one, when I sent my students home for the summer, the regression was just unbelievable, especially in our K-3 population. The reading regression was just almost, we couldn't recover from it. We would spend months trying to get back what we lost in 10 to 12 weeks. Also, when we sent kids home, whether we like to admit it or not, they don't go home. Our children don't go home to traditional families, and so they were not exposed to reading, to anything academic for 10 to 12 weeks, as well as no child care and nutrition needs as well. So we felt that it was much better for our students to be on campus. Our community has embraced it so far. We've had no major pushback. I can't reference data at this point because it's too new. I will tell you that all of our schools will stay in this model. My board supports it, our community supports it, and of course, I hope that we continue to get the support of the state board as well, because Red River Parish will stay in this model for some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes, and I'll echo the appreciation for being able to come as a system leader and share some of the work that we're doing. All of the educators across the state of Louisiana are intimately engaged in work. They're passionate about teaching and learning. They're passionate about helping children have a better future. And so any opportunity we get to come share with you the work that's taking place is definitely an honor and a pleasure. So we're in the process of potentially adopting a balanced calendar. So made sure with FUA staff that everybody understood that we had not adopted one yet, but they really asked us to come and speak to the process that we're going through right now. So we actually took the presentation that LDOE presented to you as a board a few months back and started talking it up with our principal leadership team and our teacher advisory team back in Ramsey Parish. And it received a very favorable response, something new, something different to address the same issues that was used. Talking about, we know that the regression, the achievement gap on the widest during the summertime, particularly among students who come from advantaged backgrounds. And we also know that intervention in a timely manner immediately after instruction is a lot more beneficial for students as opposed to after 36 weeks of instruction, try to make it up in a few weeks during the summertime. So after receiving that favorable response from our teacher advisory panel and our principal leadership group, we took your same presentation, LDOA's presentation, and presented it to the Education Committee of the Ramsey Parish School Board, and also received some positive reaction to that. In fact, they directed us to continue to pursue this option, getting information and input from the community, and then come back to the board meeting in February with a recommendation for the calendar for the 2021-2022 school year. So we've been engaged in that work for the last month or so. Many of you have commented, if you've seen the video, we put together a 6.5-minute informational video to explain what the balanced calendar is, as well as why we are considering moving in that direction. It's had over 24,000 views at this point. We've also put together a frequently asked questions page that we try to keep up to date with the different thoughts, concerns, and questions that we are receiving from the public, which includes our employees, as well as students, parents, and community leaders. That FAQ is updated in coordination with a survey, a completely anonymous survey that we put out that's had a little over 1,200 responses to it, where we asked if there are any questions about the calendar, the essential calendar, as well as concerns if you are not in favor of it, can you tell us why? If you are in favor of it, please tell us why, so that we can address those. We have 6 community meetings scheduled at the various high school feeder patterns that we have in Ramsey Parish. We've held one of those already. have 5 more, one tonight and one Thursday night, actually. We've been able to meet with our private school leaders, which Mr. Tommy Rock, one of your esteemed board members, is part of there in Rapid Parish, as well as our civic leaders and our employee union representatives to kind of, again, explain the whole process to them and the rationale for why. We are scheduling meetings with our higher ed. We have 4 higher ed facilities there located in Rapid Parish, so we have a very close relationship with those folks. That's one of the questions that we're getting about college start dates and things like that, as well as our military recruiting partners, as far as students who wind up joining the military and then wind up leaving, early in June if they want to for basic training. So far, the response has been very well received. The responses we get on the survey are mixed. We have a lot of folks that are for it. We have some that are passionately against it as well, and for various reasons. The biggest concerns that we've heard and the loudest concerns we've heard are specifically related to child care issues, both the logistics of and the financing of child care programs for children. One of the visions that we have in implementing this, potentially implementing this, is that we're able to provide additional academic as well as co-curricular and extracurricular activities for students, particularly those that come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds during the 2-week intersessions as well as the 5-week summer that would still be there. We're looking at the 45-day to 10-day model for the balance coming. So they go to school for 45 days, hard start, hard stop, so that teachers know what students need to be remediated over in that 2-week stop, and then about a 5-week summer intersession as well. So we're excited to be engaged in the work. Lots of great conversations taking place across our community right now regarding it, and we're going to continue moving forward. And as I said, in February, we will be making recommendations to the Rapid Parish School Board as far as adopting the calendar for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brumley and the board for this opportunity to share a little bit about our school, Shreve Island Elementary, which is a year-round or balanced calendar school. I'm Glenn Colvin. I've been the principal at Shreve Island for the last 6 years. And I want to tell you, well, first of all, about our calendar. We are the only year-round calendar in our district. And our district has been very accommodating and supportive of our schools as far as allowing us to work around their holiday breaks. And really, we fit our intercession breaks into the spaces that are most convenient so that you don't have too many breaks stacked up in too short of a period. So we generally have 2 weeks of intercession in the fall, 2 in the spring. One of each of those weeks on either side is instructional intercession, where students can come for enrichment if they're on grade level or by invitation for remediation. And that extends our school year to the end of June, typically. So just a little bit about our school. I think our school is a great representation of balance and diversity in our district. We're probably the most balanced school in so many areas in our district, in Caddo Parish. We have 722 students, 50% white, 43% African American, 7% other. 56% of our students come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and 13% are students with disabilities. So we are a wonderful mixture of all kinds of students from all backgrounds and abilities. And I should mention as well that our neighborhood component only takes up about 50% of our school. So we take in half of our 722 students come from out of our district by choice. And it's not performance-based admission. It's first come, first serve for families that are interested in the year-round calendar and feel like their students would really benefit from it. So we have parents that are choosing to come to our school, and we generally maintain a waiting list at nearly every grade level consistently. And by the way, I can testify not only as a principal of a year-round school, but as a dad. My 3 children also go to school at Shreve Island. And our school is consistently ranked very well compared to state and district schools in many areas over the years. Most recently, we have achieved top gain status for the last 2 years that's been available. So one of our biggest strengths at Shreve Island is our growth. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the data, since we do have some data. We've been a year-round school for 25 years. Of course, I've been there for the last 6 years. So I think the data does show that the year-round calendar does benefit our students, especially those economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and our African-American population. So I'm going to go into a few numbers. Hopefully I don't bore y'all. I'm not going to do too many numbers, but I'll do a few just to show how our performance compares. For the K-8 index, for the last 3 years, and of course K-8 index is the raw scores that students achieve, we've outperformed the state and the district average in both K-8 index and progress index for the last 3 years. Our subgroups, if you look at just the raw scores for their index, students achieving mastery or above are economically disadvantaged students outpace our district by 9%, scoring mastery or above, and held steady with the state. Most significant was, I believe, our students with disabilities, which we are very proud of. Our 24% of our students with disabilities scored mastery or above on the most recent state test, compared with 8% for our district and 12% for the state. Our African-American students also exceeded both the state and district average in scoring mastery or above. But of course, where we really shine is in our progress index, which of course only comprises 25% of our school score, but we feel like it's the most important part because it measures student growth from where they begin to where they end based on their individual factors. So for our whole school, in our last year, 2019, for which we received results, our students achieving growth to mastery or above, Shreve Island students, we had 41% achieve their growth to mastery target or above, compared to 26% and 30% for district and state respectively. So we outperformed in students achieving growth to mastery or above. A particular highlight in that was our ELA scores, our English Language Arts, where we exceeded the district progress index score by 20 points and exceeded the state progress index score by 16 points. So it seems, our data shows that reading is particularly enhanced, at our school. We believe that's also part of the year-round calendar. All right, progress by subgroups. How do our subgroups perform on the progress index compared to state and district? Our economically disadvantaged, our students with disabilities, and African-American students, all a greater percent of our students achieve top growth in each of those subgroups than either the state or the district. Typically exceeded the district by about 10% and the state by about 5%. Like I said, the progress index, our performance on student growth, was the reason for our top gain status the last 2 years for which that has been available. And also to note, this is an interesting point. Our our school year starts in August, the same date that the other Caddo Parish schools start. But because of the breaks that are blended in, we actually test at least 2 weeks earlier, according to grade level instruction, than the other schools. So we were actually outperforming state and district scores in these areas, with teachers having to accelerate their instruction and basically have 2 less weeks to teach that instruction. So I think that is another just impressive point, and a testament to the quality of the shorter breaks. We do not lose learning on these shorter breaks, but I think we can testify that we have a 6-week summer. That 6-week summer is so significantly different than a 12-week summer when it comes to student retention. It's still a good break for teachers and students, but they come back so ready to learn and just retaining that knowledge that they've passed on. I think that is our greatest benefit, honestly. And I could just speak also to stakeholder satisfaction. Our teachers love our calendars. Well, when we have openings, there's always lots of highly qualified applicants. We're considered one of the schools that teachers would like to teach at. There's never an issue about whether we're year-round. They generally embrace that. Our parents, in my 6 years, I've never heard, let me say this, I cannot remember hearing any complaints from parents about the year-round calendar. Our parents love the calendar. As a matter of fact, half of our student population chooses to be on the calendar. The other half that are living in our zone actually are presented a choice when they first enroll to attend a very comparable quality neighborhood school that's a mile and a half away if they don't want to be on the year-round calendar. I can't remember anyone making that option. So even our students that are in our neighborhood choose to be on the year-round calendar. Parents also say that it really works well for their work schedule. Finding childcare for 12 straight weeks for working families is a big challenge. And really their only complaint is that there's not a middle school to go to that also follows the year-round calendar. I've heard so many times, I wish we could go to a year-round middle school when we graduate from Shreve Island. We love it at Shreve Island. It works for us. I really appreciate our district supporting us and accommodating us and continuing that. It makes it a very unique school, and I think it really works for students.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Castillo.
Well, to Superintendent Brumley, first of all, I want to say thank you. We requested this report, and it's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you to two superintendents and principal who are here today. The data given by Principal Colvin was absolutely fantastic. So I wish we could put that in a report, maybe not a YouTube video, but certainly in an actual written document to share with others. The data in terms of what you've experienced is fantastic. I am curious though, Superintendent Hughes, while you don't have data going forward, you talked about the regression that was taking place in the summer, particularly as it relates to ELA. Can you share with us a little bit more about that regression data that you saw, what was happening over the course of the summer so that we can put that into context a little bit more as well?
Sure. When we looked at our DIBEL scores of our younger children from when they left, for instance, if you had a first grader that left coming into second grade when they initially tested them for the first time in the summer or coming back to school, the regression was immeasurable. We were just experiencing very, very low scores and as well as responses from our teachers when we looked at students that were progressing from one grade level to the next. As we were doing cross-grade level planning, teachers were talking about how students would leave being able to master certain standards and would come back and not be able to do the exact same standard. And so it was pretty much an issue from K to 8 where we saw this huge regression. And also, it's not just in ELA, it was in math as well. It was just those standards that they were mastering and then going home for 12 weeks and coming back and not having any exposure at all to anything while they are home for those 12 weeks it was so detrimental to us. But if I had to look at a measure of what students it was affecting the most, it would be our K-3 population. Those early literacy years were seriously affected by going home for those 12 weeks.
Mr. Colvin talked about some of the subgroups that have benefited from the year-round calendar. I would take it from your comments perhaps that what you've seen is kind of maybe the reverse or a correlation between the learning loss that occurs during the summer, particularly with some of those subgroups, the economically disadvantaged students, for example, that may not have the benefit of support, may or may not have the benefit of support during the summertime.
That is true. And what we would offer, what we would find is we would offer supports to our economically disadvantaged students in the summer, and they would not take advantage of it. We couldn't get them there. We would do everything we could to get them there, but when you have them at school, and when it is a regular school year, they're going to come to school. And so it definitely benefits that population of students. And like I said, we looked at not only academics, we looked at the child care issue as well as the nutrition side, because I have students that go home and are malnourished during the summer. And so we were offering feeding programs and different things for students, but because of transportation issues, you couldn't take advantage of these programs. And so we just felt like having them there at school, especially for those economically disadvantaged students that don't have the benefit of a car or a mother that's there, during the day to expose them to these academic standards, it was definitely more beneficial for them to be at school. So that population is certainly affected most.
Just a few more questions. In terms of teachers, Mr. Colvin, you mentioned that your teachers frankly like it, that there is a strong interest in the school, and there really hasn't been any pushback that you can remember as it relates to teachers not being particularly in favor of such a year-round calendar.
Not at all. Teachers, of course, they have a lot to complain about these days, and there's a lot of frustration.
A lot going on.
Our calendar has never been a point of frustration or complaint with our staff. It's been a point of appreciation, because when you're on the calendar, and no matter where you fall, it always seems like you're only a few weeks away from a break. And so you can really just, gather your energy and push forward instead of having these long stretches. So, our teachers, there's no pushback from our teachers on year-round. Of course, since we've been year-round for 25 years, they've all chosen, but teachers that don't even know we're year-round, when they interview with us for some reason, still, want to come. And so I've never heard complaints or any issues.
It sounds like, in fact, that one benefit is that it lessens the frustration at the beginning of the school year, because teachers aren't having to spend as much time remediating what has occurred over the course of the summer. So, Mr. Powell, you nodded your head in affirmation that you believe that would be a benefit as well.
Yeah, the research is fairly sound on the achievement gap that lies during the course of extended principal week, particularly with our economic disadvantaged students. So that's one of the big things we're looking forward to addressing adopting this position.
So tell me again your solution as it relates to providing childcare, because I've heard some pushback might be, look, we really are going to create a great inconvenience for families because of the childcare situation.
So we were actually, even before considering a balanced calendar option, we've been working with the various youth organizations and children's organizations within Practice Parish who offer various types of zoo camps, art camps, music camps, sports camps, all these different types of things that have largely been able to, the children have been able to participate in those have not been our students who come from economically disadvantaged background. And so we're already working with them to open those doors a little bit more so that more of the students who need that, those opportunities are able to take advantage of that. So now under this balanced calendar option, we're going to be able to create a system where the school system can help take over some of the logistics and for some of the particularly academic, co-curricular, extracurricular enrichment opportunities, be able to help fund some of these programs for our most economically disadvantaged students. So the school system will help take over the logistics as well as particularly provide some of the transportation for our students to engage in things. And it's opened up conversations like so many programs that are offered for half day, even our own summer school was there from 7:30 in the morning to 12:30. Well, if you're working with children who are living in an economically disadvantaged situation, and the mom's out there working 2 jobs, dad's working 2 jobs, and some of them they're working fast food restaurants. Well, you tell mom somebody's got to be there to pick up your child at 12:30 when we bring them home from summer programming, and if she's working at a fast food restaurant, she can't leave at 12:30 to come meet up with the kids. So just like Ms. Hughes was talking about the societal issues that are facing so many of our students, we feel like if we all work together, our research is about being better together, and as we as a community get to provide solutions for students, it's going to eliminate, but significantly decrease the logistical and financial burden on families as it relates to child care issues. We're going to look at it more as academic co-curricular and extracurricular opportunities for students.
Well, I see my last question is I see Superintendent Watts in the back of the room, and I'm not sure if the Superintendent's Advisory Council is considering this, but from the testimony that I've heard today, I certainly would encourage others to consider it. I'm glad you're doing it through a very thoughtful way, and I understand that you're you're at different stages in the process, and I appreciate the measured approach, Superintendent Brumley. But it's certainly, this has been one of the best meetings I've attended based on your testimony today. So thank you for coming.
Mr. Walker?
Yes, so this was a great presentation, and Mr. Colvin, it's good to see somebody from the 318 Caddo Parish District. So, so I have a question about the student opinion. So I understand, of course, a parent would love this schedule because the students in the classroom often, but also I can open up to, and anyone can answer. I want to know as a student, because Shreve Island, it's elementary, am I correct?
That's right, pre-K.
So with elementary, whenever I was in elementary, all I cared about was breaks. So if I hear it's coming from 12 to 6, at elementary I'd be like, oh, no. But what my opinion is if you were talking to a student, like a student, no matter the grade, whichever grade you're in, if you were talking to a student, what would you say to make them believe that a balanced calendar model is better than a year-round model?
And I do talk to students because we continue to take students by contract on choice throughout the grade level. So I do tours throughout the year with parents and their children of the school. And what I tell the students, just like the parents, is you're going to enjoy having all these breaks during the school year. And we show them the calendar. And a lot of our families talk about, oh, we can go to Disney World in October or during these times when no one else is going. So to be honest with you, in talking with the students, the ones we have now, they never complain, even the ones who have joined us from another school. And you would think that would be a problem because all of their peers in the other schools in our district are out in June while we're in school. But I think it probably is a testament to the quality of the environment we have at school, that kids love being there, they enjoy being there. They do not complain about coming in June. And the new students that are coming to join us, there's not pushback. I mean, I think it was kind of like what the doctor said earlier. Children are very adaptable. I think we underestimate them sometimes on how they adapt and can appreciate and adapt to new situations.
Thank you. And Mr. Powell, you said that you're developing and getting into the calendar model. What has the student opinion been on transitioning from a year-round model to a balanced calendar model?
It's a great question. In our survey that we're receiving, we absolutely are encouraging students to do it. And they check kind of what category they have parents.
Yes, sir.
Employees. And so there's been some mix, mostly those that are coming on and saying, how in the world would you consider doing this? Of course, it's changed.
Right.
Those who've been engaged in doing something the same way their entire life, just imagining something different is difficult at times. I will share this one kind of personal story, though. I happened to walk into one of our middle school classrooms beginning of last week, and they were doing class, and they were learning about the process of a bill or a law getting passed through Congress, the legislature, and it just so happened that they were using the balanced calendar initiative that we're going through the rest of the parish to debate and vote and kind of make some decisions. Also, they all watched the video, they read the frequently asked questions. They voted, and both houses actually passed it, but the president vetoed it. So I actually got to walk in just as that was happening, and they were discussing what happened next, and so referred it back down to the legislature to have some further discussion, potentially change it. So I got to present some information, and I just shared this one personal story. One young man, he openly discussed why he opposed it. His opposition was specific to the fact that his parents were no longer married, and his dad lived far enough away to where he couldn't just go for visits on the weekend. He got to fly out there during summer breaks, and so if we were going to shorten the summer break, he was going to create, where he was not going to be able to see his father during that period of time for his home kid. But when we explained how doing the 9 weeks on, 2 weeks off was actually going to give him more opportunities to see his dad throughout the course of the year, as opposed to just that summer break, it actually opened it actually was kind of an emotional moment. He realized that he was going to get this in, and he changed his vote. It still passed. It But that was one of the points that we hear in the conversations and discussions we have is situations like that we know are very real situations for many of our families. But for him to understand, wait, this is going to give me an opportunity to see my dad on 3 months.
Yes, sir. Thank you for showing it through a student's point of view. Thank you very much.
Miss Ellis?
Yes. Hi, Mr. Powell. I want to call you Dr. Powell because this is just amazing work. We spoke yesterday, and one of the things that we talked about was the challenge of pushing something like this through in such a challenging time. So I commend you for not just trying to keep your head above water right now, but saying, look, we're going to talk about doing some innovative things for our students in our district. I also want to encourage everyone here today to watch your video. I think that the video is very informative and probably one of the best examples of really the implementation process and understanding it as a parent, as an educator, but even for children. And so I commend you all for taking on this challenge, but also just for being creative and innovative for our students. So we appreciate you. Thank you.
Board members? Yes, Ms. Holloway?
Powell, Superintendent Hughes, and Mr. Principal Coleman. This is so exciting because as an educator and a leader, we always are looking for things that we can do best for children. And you need to be commended today because you took a risk, or you taking a risk in changing your outlook in your community. And I think you really are seeing that you have the autonomy and the flexibility to do what's right and best for children. And we all know it's very difficult to navigate with adults, but if you keep your focus on children and know that you are doing the right thing, and that's what we're here for, I can't thank you enough because it's so exciting that you're there and you were brave to do this, and that bravery will take you to greater heights with your students. I truly believe that you will have student growth. So thank you for what you're doing, and hopefully that you can be a model for other districts, that they can see the autonomy in this, that they can move their district the way they see fit for their own children. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. We're going to pivot back. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, just real quick for the two superintendents, I was curious, from start to finish, from when you started your planning to your implementation, how long did it take you to develop your plan, put it in place, and start school?
I guess that's for me. It was a very quick process for us. I saw an opportunity, especially in the wake of all of this change and this pandemic. I don't want to say I took advantage of it, but it was certainly a time for me to sell the idea of we had so much regression because we've been out of school since March, and we had to do something bold and dynamic to make up for that loss. And so I started thinking about it the minute that we dismissed for COVID. I knew that something had to happen in Ready Prepares because we're just going to take such a hit. And whereas I believe that it will take us several years for this to completely show in our data, I was able to sell that to our teachers, to our students, and to our public that we had to make a bold move. So the planning process for us was very quick. We started in the summer, the beginning of the summer. We started looking at, the very first thing we did was look at curriculum. How can we make this work in the short period of time that we're going to have, knowing that we're going to have a delayed start because of COVID? So it was about a 3-month process for us. I spent a lot of time talking to folks. We spent a lot of time surveying, a lot of times, like I said, selling it to parents, to childcare issues, logistical issues with buses, all those things. It was an enormous undertaking, especially in the wake of COVID. I had some staff members threaten to quit several times, but we made it. But it was about a 3-month process for us.
Thank you.
I don't recommend doing it in 3 months. I don't recommend that.
Yes, Mr. Rock.
Just want to take this opportunity to really commend Superintendent Powell and as well Superintendent Hughes also. I love innovation. And we had a wonderful meeting, the non-publics with Superintendent Powell just last week. And I know it's changed, but as an old educator, what really stuck with me is that reteaching, that opportunity to make up those kids, and it's a closer period of time. When you've done that assessment after 6 weeks, 9 weeks, whatever, you're able to reteach those kids then, as opposed to trying to do that during the summer, which is so much longer. But the other part that I really like was so many of the kids who come out of poverty don't get an opportunity to experience art, music, foreign language. And when he mentioned the collaboration between the school system and the other stockholders within the parish of Rapides, that would really be powerful to me. So I'm very, very supportive. It's going to be a challenge for us there, but I really commend Superintendent Powell.
Dr. Goldman?
Yes, Ms. Orange-Jones?
Thank you. It's all been said. Thank you for your, the example, the opportunity to learn on such an important topic, and it's such an interesting example of district innovation. I have one follow-up question, which is, what do you think was the most unexpected obstacle as you planned it?
The childcare issue is a huge thing. We had, especially with our teachers, we had teachers that were asking questions about what do I do with my child? How do I provide for that? So we attempted to do some childcare on campus for our teachers on Fridays when students were home and they were still at work. That did not work very well. We'll have to rethink that. We're looking at that's an obstacle we're having to relook at. The biggest obstacle I would say for us was selling to our staff that they're not working any more days than a normal school. We just couldn't get that over to them. We laid it out on paper, we showed it, we counted it with them, but we just couldn't get them to understand it. We finally have gotten there after we've been through our first break and they understand. And to address the issue with how do we sell students, we just told them the proof is in the experience. And once you go through a full year of this where you're able to do things during those breaks that you normally wouldn't be able to do, there will be no pushback. And so the biggest obstacle was that, just the idea of the change, that there's really no negative if you look into this, there's really nothing that you can find that's negative about doing this. There's no downfall to it. The only downfall is that it's changed, that it's different. And so that's the obstacle for us, was that we were just ingrained in doing the exact same things over and over and getting the same results. And so we had to understand that to get different results, we had to do something different. And so that's what we're selling, and right now it's working.
Who provides the instruction during the intersessions?
We contract our teachers to come in.
Okay, so teachers have opportunities for advanced pay then through this process?
During those intercession days, we pay them an hourly rate to come in, and we had an overwhelming response to that. They, believe it or not, we thought they want to go home, but they really don't.
So the supply's there?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, board members, did you have something else, Ms. Ellis?
Yeah, I was curious, were there any districts surrounding you that have become interested in this? I know oftentimes districts that are close or, other districts kind of start to have questions, but they also feed off each other in a positive way. Have you had any interest?
It rings off the hook.
Oh, good. Awesome.
For just examples, how we did it, what we did. And again, I said, our calendar is a little bit skewed this year, so it's really hard to give the true model to someone because we had to start late. But I predict that this new calendar that we're going to adopt in February will be a much better model of what we saw, earlier. So I have gotten lots of questions from superintendents, lots of requests to send, different things that we've done, and I've done that. So they're interested. I don't know that they're going to adopt it, but they're definitely interested in it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to transition back. I'm sorry, Mr. Castile.
Mr. Watts, are you gesturing?
Ms. Hughes, I'm going to invite you to coffee with Mr. Watts. Okay, is that it, Mr. Castile?
That's it. I'm glad to hear Mr. Watts nod in affirmation. Thank you.
Okay. Do we need to put it on the record? Would that help you?
No,
Okay.
we're good
Okay.
friends.
We're good.
I trust him.
We're going to transition back to Mr. Gremillon's presentation. Thank you all so much for making the trip.
So in keeping with the theme of rethinking the traditional calendar, I'd like to transition to a discussion of competency-based learning. I'll call it CBL for short. If you remember in October, I believe it was Dr. Bogey directed us to consider alternatives to the traditional seat time structure to awarding course credit. CBL is a shift from that model. It focuses on the attainment of certain competencies, and students advance upon demonstrating mastery of those competencies. The primary characteristics of CBL, again, as I stated, students advance based upon mastery as opposed to meeting a minimum seat time instructional requirement. And the coursework is organized into measurable learning objectives called competencies, and assessments are aligned to those learning competencies. This is a brief description of what each of those design principles look like. Again, students advancing upon demonstration of mastery. Critical to this particular feature is age is not a determining factor in advancing to a higher level of work. So you could have a 14-year-old student working on physics or calculus, for example, or a 10-year-old student working on 7th grade coursework. You're not limited to your age cohort. Since students advanced upon mastery, they're consistently encountering work that's new and challenging. So you can envision a scenario where you really have a hotshot student like Mr. Walker over here who masters the content in October or November of that year, but he has to sit in that classroom for another 5 or 6 months as opposed to moving on to the next standard. The CBL system accounts for that. And students, again, accumulate credit by demonstrating mastery of skills through objective measures as opposed to sort of a summative assessment. You can demonstrate mastery with a portfolio or a peer-to-peer instructional lesson. And then, again, finally, some students may complete their courses sooner than others. The key feature here is, yes, some students will finish sooner than others. However, all students will advance only upon mastery of the content. So the days of students moving on with a C-, D+ level work onto the next level, that wouldn't happen. The students would have to show that they are proficient in the course content before they are allowed to move on to the next level of coursework. Again, coursework is organized into measurable competencies. The teachers focus on formative assessments and instructional practices to drive instruction and assist their struggling students. So throughout the year, students are constantly showing their progress towards mastery across the several competencies that are somewhat aligned to our state standards. And a key feature for this one as well is that application or demonstration of mastery is not confined to the classroom. If you are a high school student working towards the geometry competencies, you may work with a local contractor to use those lessons you've learned in geometry to frame a side of a house or do an AutoCAD project to show that you've learned these specific competencies. So you're not confined to demonstrating the mastery of the coursework within the classroom. And then assessments are aligned with those learning competencies. The formative assessments drive the instruction. The teachers have to collaborate to define what mastery looks like over the course of a set of competencies and standards. And that could be a challenge, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. As stated, teachers are going to assess proficiency through multiple demonstrations of learning. It could be in the classroom, outside the classroom, an authentic assessment which shows you how to do this work in the real world. You always hear, Ms. Landry was one of my teachers growing up, and you always hear, especially in the math courses, when am I ever going to use this? So whenever you can attach a competency to a real-world problem, like framing a wall, why do I need to know these geometric proofs? Well, this is why, because you can't do the work in the real world unless you have demonstrated mastery of that particular concept. Generally, students are going to progress when they have demonstrated A or B level work. Again, that's a departure from the traditional model where students only have to pass in order to move on to the next level of work. A or B level work is pretty high standard for students to progress, and we think that if students are to follow a CBL model, they'll be more prepared for college and career because they have shown consistently mastery of content throughout their years. Another challenge here is number 5 on the third piece here. The summative assessment, the statewide assessment, really need to be made available to students upon demonstration of mastery, as opposed to that one window at the end of the school year. This allows students to move immediately over to the next level of study, as opposed to waiting until the end of the school year. So that's a bit of a challenge that is inherent to this CBL design. What's Louisiana done so far? So in Bulletin 741, which is our general handbook, Carnegie credit is or may be earned by demonstration of proficiency. The LEA has to inform the LDE of these pieces here, the name of the exam used, a listing of the requirements to demonstrate proficiency. However, it's important to note here that students enrolled in a course for the first time, which is not credit recovery or part of an accelerated program, can only earn credit by the traditional seat time requirement once the school year has begun. So the decision to demonstrate proficiency based on a portfolio, if you will, has to be made before the student begins the course. So that's a bit of a deterrent as well. Best practices. So through our research, it appears to us that Oregon and New Hampshire are the standard bearers as it relates to CBL. Oregon state policy allows all of their public schools, traditional and charter, to award credit if a student demonstrates mastery by completing coursework, providing a portfolio, passing an appropriate exam designed to measure proficiency, or providing documentation of prior learning experience which demonstrate mastery. Again, that would be sort of an apprenticeship type model. And in fact, in 2005, New Hampshire adopted rules to require that credit only be based on demonstration of mastery rather than seat time requirements. What are the challenges? Big challenges, I think, it comes as no surprise, would be it's a bit of a culture shift. We've done it this way for so long, meeting that 63,720 minutes, primarily through a traditional calendar. It's a big change. Students and families have expressed concerns over how this will affect class rank, because you're not necessarily given grades. You're moved on once you've demonstrated proficiency in a particular standard or competency. So aligning our CBL with LOSFA, TOPS, higher ed generally, to ensure that students are allowed to pursue a CBL approach without being hurt with their college applications. Again, recognizing honors, valedictorian, salutatorian with no grades, it's a bit of a shift and a way we haven't thought as a state since we've been educating children. Time. Again, this is a substantial shift. It's going to take a lot of time to incorporate a CBL model into our current policy, if that were to even happen. As stated, New Hampshire started this work about 15 years ago, and they're still ironing out the kinks there. The competencies and standards, that's a bit of a challenge. Defining what those competencies are and defining what mastery over those competencies are is a challenge. It leads to a situation where even teachers within the same school define mastery differently. And as you can imagine, that creates a bit of confusion as students advance from one course to another. To that end, there's no clear CBL definition. A lot of states adopt policies that define what CBL is to them as it relates to their core competencies and what they do well, but there's no clear definition of CBL, and so it's a bit open-ended as to what a state could define that as. The seat time requirement is a challenge because seat time constrains the self-pacing piece of CBL, and so if you have a situation where some of your students are on a CBL model, some are on the traditional seat time, it makes operation and administration of the program a little bit difficult at the school and district level. Teacher evaluations. Most evaluation systems encourage the traditional model of awarding credit, which is the seat time model. And many of our college graduates entering the teaching profession are not prepared to practice in a CBL type of school. So it would require us to coordinate with higher ed to create a system in our teacher prep programs where these students are coming out of those programs ready to teach in either a traditional model or a CBL model. Finally, the research shows that despite all of the positive aspects of CBL, there's little evidence to show that it results in higher scores on state assessments. However, that said, we are ensuring that all of our students are demonstrating mastery of content before they move on to the next competency. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. Again, there's not a lot of states that have incorporated this concept wholesale. So the research is somewhat sparse now, but the little research, in the interest of full transparency, the little research that we have found on accountability and assessments shows that there is not that big of an impact on accountability and assessments. And final point is, again, developing a system that allows students to take the state assessment upon demonstration of mastery as opposed to waiting until the end of the school year, March or April, to take that assessment is key to a well-functioning CBL program.
Yes, Mr. Castillo.
Mr. Grimillon, thank you for that report. Great job. And to Superintendent Brumley, again, kudos and thank you. I know that tomorrow we're having a joint meeting with the Board of Regents, and so this is a very timely discussion. The fact that we're also considering how do we allow for our K-12 students to have more opportunity to take college credit, and this is a timely discussion. I take it that some of the benefits from the CBL approach, Mr. Grimillon, is cost savings to parents and families, the opportunity for students to finish their K-12 curriculum early, perhaps take more college credits, advance their education, save money for families. I know that there's still some more work to be done, but it appears that there's lots of promise in this particular approach. And I can't think of a better time to have the discussion in light of our meeting with the Board of Regents tomorrow and the collaboration that's taking place with Commissioner Reed and Superintendent Brumley right now.
Ms. Voce.
This concept has always intrigued me, and years ago, my entire district was on a similar path we called the continuous progress individualized instruction. And it was really well before the technology explosion. And what we found, I mean, it's a tremendous concept, but it takes a great deal of teacher training. You've got kids all along a continuum at different places that you're dealing with. And the assessment piece, first of all, determining what is mastery is difficult because you've got different opinions even within the same groups of educators within a district. But the assessment piece we found, because we were giving assessments to kids every day over the same concepts because they were at different points where they demonstrated mastery. So that piece from a statewide level has to really be looked at very closely. We were not able in many ways to keep up with the different versions, the assessments that could still maintain validity and make sure that there was security in those types of assessments. So I am intrigued by this. I always have been. I truly believe in a concept such as this, but it takes a great deal of planning, training, and support to make something like this work effectively. And I would be very interested in pursuing this particular, initiative if we can do it well. And I think with the technology that is available to us, we can make much better strides than maybe we could many years ago with the same types of concepts.
Ms. Orange-Jones?
First of all, this has been a really interesting presentation, so thank you, Mr. Gremion, and thank you, Dr. Bolte, for initiating this discussion. Can you just speak a little bit more to the final point? And you gave some voiceover to it, but I do believe it is such an important issue, critical issue as it relates to accountability and assessments. What we know for sure about the challenges and the lessons learned, specifically around the impact on state assessments. Can you speak to that? A little fuzzy for me.
Yeah. So part and parcel to this approach is that we like our students to move on once they've demonstrated mastery, as opposed to waiting around until the end of the school year to take that test. To the extent that we can expand our assessment window or make the assessment window, and I don't even know if that would be possible, open year-round so students can show what they've learned before they move on to the next course level. That's key to making this process work. So if we aren't allowed to be flexible with the assessment window, then it really takes some of the teeth away from the program as a whole, because students would still have to wait until the end of the year to take that assessment in order to move on to the next course level. So we would need to rethink, and this is an issue that's being faced by every state that's incorporating this, making that state assessment available year-round.
That one-time annual assessment, that's what would have to be rethought. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Orange-Jones, also to that point, if you recall, when Principal Colvin was speaking, he indicated about the 2-week window where his students were testing earlier, essentially in terms of time provided than other students. I think if we see more systems and if we see more movement towards the balanced calendar approach, it will call for us to look at that assessment window to make sure that it makes sense. And we would certainly commit to doing that and bringing that to your attention for your consideration. To Principal Colvin's points, I just wanted to reemphasize one of the things he shared, just so everyone can understand. Whenever we look at his school's performance with students in every subgroup, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, students of color, both on the index piece as well as the growth piece, their schools significantly outperformed both the district and the state. And I think that's a testament certainly to the culture of the school and the teachers, but I think that there has to be something around this calendar piece to that as well. What Mr. Gremion is presenting today, I think, is the next version of what this could be, and it certainly aligns with some of the work that we need to be doing with higher ed, with the Board of Regents, to Mr. Castille's point. So we will continue, although we're very early on in this research, just a couple of months, in fact, for us as an agency. We'll continue to do that. For us and for people my age, I call this the Doogie Howser approach. For people of a new generation, I think that's the Sheldon Cooper approach. But we are excited about looking into this and seeing where this might take us. But as Superintendent Vaucher says, we understand the level of planning and I's that would have to be dotted and T's that would have to be crossed to make this be successful.
Mr. Castile, did you have something else?
Just a very quick point, and this is a little bit personal, and that is I see Superintendent Jenkins in the audience and Principal Elsie Simeon. When I was a student at Crestwell Elementary in 4th grade, I reached a point in the semester where the teacher said, look, I really don't have anything else that we could teach you. And so we're going to sit you in the back of the class and you can read because you've covered everything. And this happened maybe like 4 to 6 weeks toward the end of the school year. And I felt like, well, wait a minute, I really want to do more, but the best that was offered is to just sit in the back and read. So the opportunity to have students who are motivated to be able to advance through CBL is I think, a great opportunity for the state. I understand that there's a lot of work still left to be done. So I don't want to get too excited, but thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Castile. Mr. Morris.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe there's a potential fit here with the virtual learning programs, schools that are particularly dedicated to virtual learning, if that might be a good application. Superintendent Brumley.
Yes, sir. I mean, and I do think, again, to Superintendent Vaucher's point, with where we are with technology now, we're in a completely different space than where we were even, a year ago. And so many doors have been opened as a result of that. There are silver linings to this horrible pandemic. One of those being virtual instruction, modality of instructional opportunities and school configuration for parents' choice, and a number of other things. So certainly this would be one of those areas where we will be able to explore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gremillion. I'm really interested in this, and so we should probably schedule a follow-up because I do not want to have all of the audience have to go along that rabbit hole with me this close to lunch. So let's do a follow-up, Mr. Gremillion, just the two of us. Okay. Are we finished with this item? Do you have any more discussion or question? Any opposition to the motion? Okay, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 20, item 4.3, consideration of a plan regarding the review of academic content standards in social studies. The LDE recommendation is to approve the plan as outlined.
Superintendent, I see Dr. Chasson coming up. We're going to do a presentation? Okay. I need a motion. Thank you, Mr. Castile, and a second by Ms. Orange-Jones. She switched it to floor. It's thinking. I'm being asked if there was public comment on the last item. There are no comment cards on 4.2. Ms. Davis, do you have public comment cards on 4.2? Okay. Sorry about that. Well, we're waiting on a presentation anyway. Who is it? Okay. Dr. Tia Mills, the president of Louisiana Association of Educators.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Tia Mills, president of the Louisiana Association of Educators. We have several stakeholders who have not been included in these conversations. The individuals who will directly be impacted by such changes, and being educators and students, of course. Child care is in fact an issue. Compensation and funding will be an issue as well. With our state being below the southern regional average, there are educators who work summer jobs to supplement their income. I participated in a similar pilot program with my district several years ago. The district could not continue with the program due to cost implications. In October, LDOE presented data that considered the findings inconclusive. The NEA also gathered research around this issue that indicated not having long-term improvement. LAE and its members stand ready to work hand in hand with those who will do a deeper dive around the proposed balanced school calendar and what it would mean for students and educators.
Thank you, Dr. Mills. And I'm sorry, I didn't have that comment card. Yes, ma'am. Where are we? Who's presenting? Dr. Chasson. Dr. Chasson?
Hello, this morning I'll be presenting to you all our social studies standards review process for your consideration.
Is that your computer? Okay. Snooze, maybe 8 hours.
So to begin with some history and context, BESE Bulletin 741 dictates that a standards review process occurs at least once every 7 years. Our social studies standards were last revised in the 2010-2011 school year. And so for that reason, we are now proposing a social studies standards review process that will be outlined in this presentation. So our goal with all Louisiana standards is that they're rigorous and prepare students for college and the workplace. Our goal specifically with social studies is to graduate students who are knowledgeable about the world, possess critical thinking skills, and are able to participate as productive and competent citizens. We have 5 basic revision goals, one of which is to shift to a more inquiry-based approach for social studies. When we think about students learning social studies content in classrooms, this inquiry-based approach is especially important when you consider that students are reading multiple materials, and we want students to be using critical thinking skills to read, to practice reading endurance of these social studies texts, and then be able to make connections between text, topics, events, and people, synthesize and evaluate that information, rather than just receive content, copy notes, and then repeat the notes back to the teacher in the classroom. So what's also important in this revision process is to ensure a coherent sequence of content. So right now in our current standards, students learn U.S. history in 4th grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, and then they don't revisit that until U.S. history in high school, which is most often taken in 11th grade. So we see some gaps in timeline where there are years where students are skipping certain content areas and balancing, so they are having to remember content from several years before. So one of the revision goals is to ensure a coherent sequence of content so that the learning can really build upon itself from year to year in social studies content and skills. Another goal is to shore up the elementary level instruction of social studies to make sure that students have some really foundational knowledge of social studies content prior to entering high school courses and then post-secondary coursework. We also hope to integrate the historical perspectives of people from all different backgrounds. So the standards review structure somewhat parallels the ELA and math processes from several years ago. There will be a steering committee of 26 members who will oversee the standards review process, and then 2 content expert work groups, each made up of 18 members. And given their expertise, just like in the ELA and math process, some educators from the steering committee will also serve on a content expert work group, depending on their grade brand expertise. So the 26-member steering committee will oversee and coordinate the standards review process. And due to the technical nature of this work, at least half of the committee will be K-12 Louisiana educators, including at least 1 educator each from a charter and a non-public school system. The remaining members of the steering committee will be nominees from higher ed, business and industry, and the community. The next slide outlines those 26 members of the steering committee, and you can see that it is made up of K-12 educator representatives, higher education, a tribal leader, parents and guardians, community members, and students. The content expert work groups will consist of 18 members and be broken into 2 grade bands, a kindergarten through grade 5 and a grade 6 through grade 12. We plan to use a selection process that begins with self-nomination for seats for both the steering committee and the content expert work group. And we plan to use all of our methods of communication to publicize the release of the application, with the goal that this process will ensure that all interested Louisiana educators have an opportunity to apply. The committee will represent all regions of the state, demographic diversity of the state, and that the committee possesses expertise in historically marginalized groups. Outside of the committee and work groups, the public will be asked and invited to weigh in on every single standard, and all committee meetings will be open to the public. The next slide shows an outline of the timeline. So today we're seeking approval of this plan with the hopes to release the application by the end of this week to serve on the committee or the content expert work groups. You will see the members of those committees return to you in March, when we will seek approval of the committee and the work group members at the March BESE meeting. From March to July, we would conduct the committee and the work group sessions, post for public comment in July and August, and then present the standards to you all at the October BESE meeting, with a plan for the 2021-2022 year to provide professional development for educators across the state on the new standards, and implement the new standards in classrooms during the 2022-2023 school year. The last slide just outlines normal operating procedures for a standards review process, including things like adherence to the Louisiana Open Meetings Law, the procedure for public comment, and voting. I'm happy to take any questions about the social studies standards review process.
Is there any variation from what we did with the ELA and math? It looks very similar, and I know that you said that. I just am curious that when you guys dug into the details, if there were any revisions that you made.
So I think the main difference is that there were larger content expert work groups.
Okay.
The ELA and math groups got very large. I think they were around 100 people on the ELA, and then the math intern. And so this is a little smaller in size, but still really along the same lines of that review process.
Okay. I'm already getting messages from people who want to participate, so my response is going to be sure to apply. Are you looking at doing some of this virtual? I mean, looking at the timeline, it seems like COVID's still going to be a factor. Have you guys talked about doing it virtual? Are you planning on doing in-person meetings?
I think
or meetings across the state?
That depends on what phase we're in accordance with the open meetings law.
Okay. All right. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, just real quick, I wasn't sure about the selection process for your students, and I was curious if that might be an opportunity for our Ed Rising group to get involved.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
I wasn't sure about the selection process on the committee for the student component, and I was wondering if that might be an opportunity for the Ed Rights, participants in the Ed Rising group, our future teachers.
Oh, are this by students? I'm wondering if it doesn't mean K-12 students as opposed, you're talking about, and are you mean the K-12?
That was my interpretation.
Yes, yeah. Okay, well, they're the Ed Rising, the students in Ed Rising. Okay, I get it. Dr. Davis, thank you.
So I have a question about how focused the steering committee is going to be on the ACT, given our conversations around the fact that our ACT scores are declining and our standards aren't aligned to what the ACT is testing. Is that going to be, since the ACT is not going away in terms of TOPS awards, is there going to be a special emphasis on trying to align, or at least our social studies standards, to what is covered by the ACT?
So social studies is not tested on the ACT currently.
Isn't there like a general social sciences on the ACT anymore? No?
Is a reading section.
A reading section there. Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Holloway.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Chasson. Very informative, and I know it's going to be a great work ahead. Dr. Bovee, I'd like to ask Dr. Bromley to consider 2 BESE members as liaisons, not voting members, but liaisons on this committee to work and to report back to BESE.
So are you making an appointment on that, or are you just simply asking me to?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would make an appointment.
Okay. And these would be non-voting members of the steering committee?
Yes,
Okay.
please, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, members? Okay, we do have a public comment. Mr. Patrick Dobard, if you'll, I think you know the procedure. Good job.
Morning, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm Patrick Dobard. I'm the CEO of New Schools for New Orleans. And for over the last 30 years, I've had the privilege and the honor to serve in a number of capacities in serving Louisiana public school students and families, be it the support work that I'm doing now, the work that I'm doing at New Schools for New Orleans, or in the role as the Recovery School District Superintendent for a number of years, or as the former confidential assistant to the State Superintendent, or the Deputy for Legislative Affairs in the Department of Education, or in the role as the State Social Studies Assessment Coordinator. But what I'm most proud of is the 10 years before those 20 years at the department, 15, 16 years at the department, where I was a social studies teacher. I taught in different areas of the state. And one of the things that, as being a social studies teacher is extremely important to me, is that thinking about the training that I received as I went into that role. And I was trained by some of the finest educators in our state at two historically black colleges in Louisiana, Southern University New Orleans and Southern University Baton Rouge. And as I look around the room, I see Terrence Lockett sitting here with Education Reform Now, whose uncle, the now deceased, unfortunately, Dr. Raymond Lockett, who was my professor as I worked on my master's in history at Southern and Baton Rouge, renowned African-American leader in academic studies, well-respected amongst his peers. And when I think about the perspective that he and others gave me on history, I often found all these years in education in Louisiana that our standards, particularly in social studies, did not reflect that diversity, that deep diversity in thought and in the pedagogy that goes along with sharing that. And so in seeing that we have such a significant population of black students in our state that oftentimes don't see themselves reflected in literature, in other areas, in other walks, I would encourage this committee to ensure that there's diversity on the committee, and not just racial diversity, but diversity in thought. Because I think about when Dr. Lockett shared with me about Reconstruction, I did my master's thesis on black Reconstruction in Louisiana, which I pointed out that blacks were participating in the power process, but too many times history books made it seem that blacks in Reconstruction were just pawns and not doing anything significant. Whereas Robert H. Isabel, a black man who was the first speaker pro tem during Reconstruction, actually had legislation and was moving things so much that the Times-Picayune, at the time the Picayune in New Orleans, an independent white-owned newspaper, actually documented his workings. And I used to have to supplement my material for my students in order to make certain that they were able to know that men that look like them and women that look like them actually participated in U.S. history way more than that they were receiving. And so I give those examples because I understand how complex, how nuanced, and how hard the work is. And so to try to meet everybody's desires and standards as it relates to curriculum is a very daunting task. But I think you have a great opportunity ahead of you to do that. The superintendent has already given me his word and his team that they're going to keep these things in mind and seek diversity in all things. And the last thing I'd say is Representative Royce Duplessis put forth a resolution, House Resolution 55, that he didn't move forward in the first special session, but he got assurances that the State Department and others will work on the diversity. So he had a lot of detailed things within that resolution that we hope will be addressed as this committee meets. So thank you for the opportunity to share. Again, seeking diversity, and we want to make certain that when this process is done, that there's a curriculum for social studies that all of Louisiana and our families can be proud of. So we look forward to you all putting this committee together, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mr. Dobard. Ms. Orange-Jones?
I actually have a follow-up question for Mr. Dobard, so stay close. Just, first of all, thank you for your comments. Very much appreciated, and you and I have obviously spoken at length about this topic, which of course is something that's very, that I feel very similarly about and very passionate about as well. I recall after Royce Duplessis put forward such a thoughtful resolution in the legislature, I was able to I actually wrote about it. And I remember you then sent me your whole dissertation, page by page, because of your own passion. So I appreciate your passion on this topic. A question for you, when you look at this process, is there anything in particular you would actually advise that we take a look at, again, to get to the outcome of the diversity in which you speak, which I think is so important?
Yeah, I think it's one is like diversity of thought. And so I'll give a very personal experience. Many years ago, I'll date myself a little bit more, though I'm open about it. I had to take the National Teachers Exam, which is today called the Praxis. And I felt like I was well educated in schools and, I felt really good. So my sophomore year of college, I decided I was going to take the core battery, which is like English and, the basic things. And I hadn't taken any education courses yet, and I aced them all. So I was just what they call the specialty exam, away from, getting my certification as a teacher. Then when I had to take the NTE certification part, American history, there were things on it that I was taught from a different perspective. Meaning that if it was around the 1920s, I was studying deeply about Marcus Garvey and Garveyism, the Harlem Renaissance, from a whole historical perspective, where I might not have been as up on like some of the nuances of the Treaty of Versailles, World War I and what was going on. Not saying that one is more important than the other, but those who put that assessment together did not have an Afrocentric lens. And I can remember one time I had to take it like 3 times before I met that criteria. And so for me, it was like, wow, did I get a good education? Or was it that they had so much of a focus, particularly in the history part, that was so Eurocentric, it did not meet with the standards that had set by my Afrocentric training. And so I think for the committee to understand that there is a wide, diverse view of history and views of history, that they have to figure out how to get that nuance of what's general enough for students to know and should be expected to be assessed on. Not plain trivial pursuit, but like valid critical thinking. And that's why I think supplementary materials come in handy. The text that you use. You might want to use the text on Nat Turner when talking about antebellum and slavery. It could be a part that's not as gruesome. It could just be a part that's like, it's historical, but it makes students think. And I used to use that. And I had students, black and white, oftentimes more white students than black students, that were asking deep, critical questions and wanting to understand. And so when I bring this home to my parents, it's a little uncomfortable, but thank you for sharing this, Mr. Dobart. And so I think just understanding the diversity of literature and using those as supplementary materials, being open to things that will be uncomfortable for some people, and making certain that they understand that social studies and understanding U.S. history, world history, even civics, so like think of the political times we're in. If people can put aside just the bigger differences, but understand that there's a way to tie this all together, to expose our children and open up their minds and our teachers' minds, and then assess fairly, I think that'd be big. Because I've always said, math is universal. And so when you tell a kid 2 + 2, like, I don't care where you are, that's 4. But when you start talking about the nuances around world history, U.S. history, vantage points, then it becomes a little less, clear. And so, when you make assessments, you don't want people, again, playing trivial pursuit. And so it's harder for social studies. And when I think about like assessments like the NTE, there are things that it felt like, it's like just how much random stuff we could get you to prove that you're a good social studies teacher. And all the times I had to take it over until I finally passed it, I had to go back and teach myself different versions of history to finally get over that hump. And while at the same time, I felt like I was still being effective. And so I know that there can be testing biases. I know that Louisiana has done a phenomenal job to eliminate that in our state testing. I worked in that department. But I also know there's still a lot of work to do in curriculum. So those are a few things I would ask y'all to consider.
Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dubar. Anybody else? Yes, Dr. Davis.
I'd just like to say thank you for your comments. I really appreciate your perspective, and it's rare that we agree with each other, so I'd like to make a note of it on the calendar.
Do you want me to put that in the record, Dr.
So
Davis?
This is a really big deal.
I think it's
And
in
then
the record.
second, I'd just like to say that the ACT had social studies when I took it. I just looked. It's been a while. Thank you. I know it does.
I don't even know where to go after this. Okay. Any other comments or questions, members? No, we've got it. And that was our public comment. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 27, item 5.1, consideration of an update report regarding the Accountability Commission. The department recommendation is to receive the minutes of the meeting held November 16, 2020, and to approve the appointment of Ms. Narisha Kurtz, a parent representative, to the membership of the Accountability Commission as recommended by the State Superintendent of Education.
Thank you, Ms. Holloway, and a second by Mr. Castile. Do we have any public comment on this?
No, ma'am.
Superintendent?
Yeah, I would just like to make one comment about Ms. Kurtz, just so you all have a little sense of who she is and her experience. I'm really excited about Ms. Kurtz coming on to the Accountability Commission. She, of course, is a parent of a young child. She has previous experience serving in various capacities with charter schools. But presently in her life and career, she owns a construction company and works here in Baton Rouge and leads a construction company for both residential and commercial projects. So I think not only as a parent, but also as an educator and now as a business leader, I think that she certainly fits the mold of what we are looking for in terms of membership on the commission. So thank you, Dr. Boki, for allowing me to introduce her.
Yes. Okay. Board members, any comments, questions, or concerns? Hearing none, any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 37, item 6.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111, Louisiana School District and State Accountability System regarding accountability calculations, assessments, special populations, and technical edits. The recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 111. Revised backup documentation has been distributed with changes highlighted.
Ms. Fauché, do you want to move on that one? I'm sorry.
I'll move on it. I just
Thank
have a
you.
question.
And then a second by Mr. Rock. Right? Ms. Fauché, your question.
Okay, I wanted to ask a couple of questions on this, but I just looked at this revised piece where it's looking like on page 44 of our booklet, but I guess section 904 on the urgent intervention required that we're striking out for the 21-22 school year.
No.
It seems like, which means that we have not yet made a decision on that. And I'm seeing Ms. Noel's head shaking yes, because I did have some concerns, and the superintendents had some concerns, I know at their advisory council meeting, that when we're looking at applying these labels this year, we're asking for that waiver where the 21 assessment would not put a school into the urgent intervention required or comprehensive intervention required. However, initially it was proposed that it would recapture these scores in conjunction with next year's scores for next year. And we ask that DOE pursue a waiver potentially, or to look at and consider if we need to present a waiver or request a waiver, so that this year's scores would not put schools in it in conjunction with next year's scores, if that makes any sense. And I was assured by the department that we would look into that and potentially, as we see these results, make some of those requests if they indeed warrant that. So I'm satisfied, with that part of it, and it seems like we are striking out the 21-22 piece to this, and going to take a look at it after the assessment. Is that correct, Dr. Brumley?
Yes, ma'am. We took the concerns from Superintendent's Advisory Council as well as the request that you had of the agency and have begun conversations with USDOE on that. But at this point, the recommendation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Noel or Mr. Shackett, but it is just around the actual label and not about the data being used for future years.
But that we are going to look at that.
That's right.
And if it warrants that, we're going to consider requesting that.
That we will continue to have conversations with USDOE and make decisions as additional information becomes available. We also know that there is a shift. We anticipate a shift at USDOE in terms of administration, and so we expect that we'll have new or additional signals coming from that agency as well that we have to consider.
Okay. The other part of this that I had asked Ms. Noel to take a look at that has nothing to do with these particular labels, but in the accountability in this bulletin, with alternative schools, if you look at, I guess it's under comprehension intervention required, section 909, schools can be in that comprehensive intervention required if their cohort graduation rate is less than that 67% over a period of time. With the alternative schools, we went to a different rubric that more closely measured progress and success for alternative schools. However, in the ESSA plan, we've got that 67% cohort grad rate, so we could have an alternative school meeting all of their goals and their objectives, and and they are recapturing dropouts, and if they are working successfully with them, that's why we created the alternate rubric for them. So we were asking for that we take a look again at that 67% cohort grad rate, since that's not part of their rubric, because they're already trying to recover those dropouts. And if they do that within that 4-year period, we don't want that necessarily counting against them. I had this discussion with Ms. Noel, and I'd like her to comment on that, because she seemed to indicate that that is an area that they would like to take a look at and pursue.
Hi, Superintendent Borche and BESE members. I'm talking my teacher voice. I hope you can hear me. You are correct. We did have that conversation, and currently, as you know, we did update our alternative school policy to where we use credential attainment in the rubric that you spoke about. The 67% graduation cohort rate is federal policy. It is actually still in the ESSA structure, and as you know, it's also in our state policy. We are going to begin conversation with USDOE on this, much like what you just mentioned in terms of the CIR data usage moving forward. And so I don't have an update other than what we talked about the other day, and that was the commitment to have the discussion as we move forward and as the new administration takes form at Washington, D.C. This is on our list of agenda items for them as well. So that's my update to you today on this.
Well, no, I didn't even expect an update. I just wanted on record that we would take a look at that and pursue that for the alternative schools, and nothing more than that at this point, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris.
Yeah, just point of clarification, with the potential wavering of the UIR, CIR labeling for 1 year, in the earlier presentation, some of the literacy grants were tied to this labeling. Do we have any exposure there for losing or being disqualified from any of that grant money with this 1 year waiver?
Would you like for me to?
Sure.
Okay.
You have the answer.
Thank you. Okay, so when we went into 2020 without spring assessments, the USDOE allowed us to waive to where CIR, UIR labeling stayed in place and actually went to this year that we're in right now. The year we're in right now, we're saying we are not wanting to add to a school that doesn't already have a CIR, UIR label. We're not suggesting that we add that label to them. They do have the option, however, to choose the label. And that would be something that a superintendent locally would make a decision about if they felt there was any type of resource that could support them in this year. So that is where that is sitting at the moment.
Bottom line, there's no exposure for losing any of the grant money.
Sir,
Bottom line, there's no exposure for losing any of the grant money.
that's correct.
Okay. Anything else, board members? Do we have public comment on this one? Okay. Board members, do you have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 50, item 6.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 118, statewide assessment standards and practices regarding student assessment and technical edits. The recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 118.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Boche, and a second by Mr. Rock. Do we have any public comment? Superintendent, do you have any comments on this one? Board members, do you have any questions? Do you have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 62, item 6.3, consideration of revisions to bulletins in response to Executive Proclamation Number 168, JBE 2020. The recommendation is to ratify the emergency provisions made by the BESE President under interim authority for revisions to Bulletin 741, 741 non-public, and 126, and to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Bulletin 741 non-public, Louisiana Handbook for Non-Public School Administrators, and Bulletin 126, Charter Schools.
Looking for a motion? Thank you, Mr. Morris. A second by Mr. Garvey. Are there any public comments? Board members, do you have any questions? Are there any public comments? No. Okay, board members, any questions? Any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 67, item 6.4, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 135, Health and Safety regarding injury management and heat acclimatization. The recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 135.
Looking for a motion. Thank you, Ms. Orange-Jones, and a second by Mr. Rock. Do we have any public comment cards? No public comment cards. Board members, do you have any questions or objections? Hearing no objections, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 70, item 6.5, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 139, Louisiana Child Care and Development Fund programs regarding administration of school readiness tax credits. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 139 and to approve as declaration of emergency for a period of 120 days or until adopted as a final rule.
So moved.
A motion by Mr. Davis, a second by Mr. Rock. We do have public comments from Ruth Ann Oakey Frost with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children and Cindy Bishop with Child Care Association. Okay. Both support the recommendation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. My name is Ruth Ann Oakey Frost. I'm the policy director for the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. I just wanted to briefly speak today in support of this revision and thank the department for their diligent work on it. Our organization has deployed a series of surveys to study the impact of COVID-19 on the child care sector. Those survey findings have been frankly very troubling. In the initial wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, 70% of child care providers were temporarily closed, and as they reopened, they had to manage smaller class sizes recommended by public health officials and increased costs to cover cleaning supplies and PPE. By mid-June, the collective estimated losses to the child care sector was $137.5 million. In addition to helping our youngest learners to develop and grow and enter kindergarten ready to learn, the child care sector is a crucial part of our economy. It's difficult to envision a successful economic recovery in which parents of young children don't have a quality child care provider on which they can rely while they work or look for work or attend school. By adjusting the number of hours to qualify for a school readiness tax credit, this change will not only take into consideration the practical realities of the pandemic, but help quality child care providers continue to access this important financial support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bishop? Ms. Bishop, can you come back the other direction since we have
She can,
the
or walk
streaming?
behind the table.
Or walk behind the tables, Ms. Bishop. You can come this way. Sorry. We're just trying not to block the streaming. Or trip on course, yes. That works too. Oh, there's cords, I didn't see them.
Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Bishop, Madam Chair and members of the board. I just want to say thank you so much for your extreme support of the school readiness tax credits. They're so important for child care providers and families. There are different levels of credit, and there's even a tax credit that a business can donate $5,000 to their local R&R and get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit back on that $5,000. So that helps these resource and referral agencies. Just want to say support. I was part of the legislative endeavor when we passed the tax credit several years ago. United Way was part of that. Tulane University was part of that. LANO, Louisiana Association of Nonprofit. So I just wanted to thank y'all from the bottom of my heart. It's so important for child care providers.
Thank you. Board members, any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 72, item 6.6, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 140, Louisiana Early Childhood Care and Education Network regarding early childhood care and education accountability. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 140 and to approve as declaration of emergency for a period of 120 days or until adopted as a final rule.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Davis, and a second by Mr. Rock. We have some public comments.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Libby Saunier and Cindy Bishop. Cindy does not wish to speak, but she supports the recommendation, and then Dr. Saunier is coming up. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dr. Libby Saunier, the Executive Director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. With the recognition of the impact of COVID-19 on child care providers in our state who have experienced an unprecedented loss, the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children is supportive of the reduction in the requirement of class observations for the 2021 academic year. With the reduction of observations of the class, of using the class tool, the integrity of the accountability system remains intact, and the department should be commended on the recommendations that are being made. With full understanding that class observations will return to where they should be once the COVID pandemic has passed us, we really do want to thank y'all for your efforts to help really alleviate concerns and stress on the child care sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions? Do you have any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 75, item 6.7, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1903, regulations and guidelines for education of dyslexic students. The department recommendation is to approve, as notice of intent, the repeal and reestablishment of Bulletin 1903.
We need a motion. Thank you, Mr. Rock, and a second by Mr. Garvey. Do we have any public comments? No? Okay. Board members, do you have any objection? Or do you have any questions? No questions? Any objection? Hearing none, motion passes. I believe that's the last item.
Yes, ma'am. That concludes your agenda.
Thank you very much.